I agree. And we're talking about the international news, so we should be saying Zulu time anyways.
I'm pro time zone abolition, so
universal basic time zone.
Yeah. I'm not even really joking about that, and it makes people really upset when I legitimately argue for the abolition of time zones.
At least in the US, I'm all about having just a time zone, and we can just figure it out around that.
Yeah, everybody's just going to be different work schedules. It's all good.
Right.
Well, everybody, welcome again to another exciting episode of the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. This is our first international edition where we're going to be covering just international relations and happenings that are going around the world. Today, I am joined by the ever-lovable Art Black.
Howdy, howdy.
Joining us again is Universal Discourse. We are always happy to have her.
Hi.
Chase Mitchell.
Hey, glad to be here.
And joining us for the second time on our show is Brad of Turing News.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
If this is your first time checking out the podcast or the news roundup, we typically do a news roundup on every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. We are going to be starting up an international section, and this is the pilot show for that. Before we get into it, Brad, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, since I'm sure that people would be happy to hear it.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Brad of Touring News. I've done some news streaming, econ streaming, international affairs, current events and stuff on Twitch. On Touring News for a long time. I've done a decent amount of IRL broadcasts. Some people saw me at 4th of July events in Washington, D.C. Some people might have seen me at the Capitol on the 6th of January. And then I just recently moved to Cleveland, Ohio. I took a job at a community greenhouse partner program. So I'm here doing 25 hours of work a week, doing microgreens beds, permaculture, some no-till, and so forth, in trade for housing, internet, electricity, and food. And then hopefully going to be getting involved with the Nina Turner campaign out here in Cleveland a little bit as she runs for U.S. House of Representatives. So yeah, I appreciate the chance to come chat with you all.
Thank you, Brad, so much for joining us. Dylan Burns is supposed to be joining us, and when he does get on, we'll do a shout out for him as well, because I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are interested in hearing about his work as well. On today's International News Roundup, we will be covering developments within the South China Sea. We will be covering developments happening in Latin America and the rise of left politics again within Latin America, and also U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan and the Afghan peace deal. So, what topic do you all want to get into first? I'm of the opinion that we could do Afghanistan, since that's a little more U.S. related first, but I am open to covering whichever topic you all would like to cover first.
Honestly, I'd say with the hope that Dylan will still arrive and show himself, and he hasn't, taken the coward's way out. I think we should maybe start. We should maybe start with Brazil and Lulu, because I think that I'd like to hear more of what Dylan has to say on the other topics.
Yeah, Lula da Silva. Yeah, I'm good with that. Universal Discourse, Art Black, you guys good with starting with South America? All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Personally, I am not a South American political aficionado. However, I've been doing a ton of research on this topic over the last couple of weeks in order to make sure that I'm up to snuff on my stuff. Just a brief kind of breakdown of what's going on. We have two leftist governments, or possible leftist governments, coming into power again, with the movement towards socialism in Bolivia regaining power after the right-wing coup in Bolivia. And we have the Supreme Court in Brazil overturning Lula da Silva's conviction and basically destroying the prosecution's ability to retry that case due to throwing out a lot of the evidence that was brought against him. So that is the brief short of what is going on. But there's other developments, and I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on these developments that have happened and what kind of things we should be on the lookout for. So anybody, go ahead and take the floor.
Lula da Silva the corruption conviction may have been overturned, but in fact, they decided they tried him in the wrong state. So they're going to actually open proceedings in a different state. So he's not off the hook.
Yeah, I think a little.
Temporarily he's out.
I think a little of what Cypher was getting towards with saying, quote, being off the hook is a decent amount of the evidence that was thrown out was kind of some of the, I guess, like the most important evidence against him. I couldn't figure out like everything that they're throwing out and what they're still going to allow, but Universal, you are correct that they're going to be moving it from, I don't remember where it was, but I think they're moving it to the Brasilia state. But it does open up the opportunity for a resurgent Lula to run for president against Bolsonaro in 2022. And one thing that I think really has just even like come to begin happening in Brazil is it seems like Bolsonaro's rhetoric about coronavirus, about masks, about vaccinations and so forth seems to be changing a little bit since this court ruling. And some of the articles that you had us read, seem to illustrate that they thought that that was the reasoning, that he was changing his stance, changing his rhetoric a little bit, as Brazil has been one of the worst hit COVID countries in the world. But many people on the left will be happy to see the return of Lula.
For sure.
Yeah. I think that it's important.
No, go ahead.
Cypher.
No, go.
I was going to say, I think it's important to acknowledge the context in which the original thing happened. So, and some people may not be aware, so I'll try to give like a 30-second primer. There was a massive scandal in Brazil and Latin America, probably the largest corruption scandal in the history of Latin America, probably one of the largest ever in the world. And the investigation was called Operation Car Wash. And the result of that operation was that basically like a third of the cabinet and Lula da Silva, then president of Brazil, and his successor and a few other people were charged and with corruption, and Lula ended up spending some time in jail. Now, this was a major blow to democracy in Brazil. At the time, it was heralded as like a victory. It was, hey, look at this anti-corruption effort that is successfully holding people to account regardless of their level of power. Like it was heralded as a really good thing. But the evidence now seems to be that, one, the judge that oversaw the original trial was actively colluding with prosecution. A lot of the evidence was flimsy at best, and there doesn't seem to be a very good case to say that Lula was ever guilty of corruption. I mean, what they accused him of is basically accepting a remodel of an apartment that he could have afforded 300 times over. Like this wouldn't have been a bribe worth taking in his position. It wouldn't have been a significant impact on his personal economics status to be worth.
If anybody wants to give me any, those are the only kind that I take.
What's that?
As you are, Chase. Sorry.
No, it's good. But I'm just trying to acknowledge, like, this was a major blow to democracy. And actually, I think that his apparent vindication, and I think you guys are right that there's still a chance that this goes and gets tried in Brasilia, because it was a technicality. They basically said, oh, the state didn't have jurisdiction. It should have been done at the federal level. So take it to the capital. Yes. Like there's a chance that it'll go to Brasilia. It seems unlikely though. And even if it does, the Brazilian legal system is pretty slow, and there's no way that he's going to be barred from running in the 2022 election. Yeah,
that's all my readings on this have been pointing towards the Brazilian government or the Brazilian Supreme Court basically taking a kind of a step back from it and being like, hey, we kind of fucked up. And so we're going to right the error that we kind of fucked up on and allow the political process to take back over. So that's just how I'm viewing this as an outsider looking in. But there's a ton more stuff that's going on with this. A poll recently showed that Lula da Silva is the only person that wins outright in a contest between himself and Bolsonaro, out of additional 10 candidates that are possible front runners.
Was it that he wins outright or just pulling ahead of?
Let me double check here. I think it was winning outright, but it was very thin. Found 50% of the 2,000 people or so interviewed would certainly or could vote for Lula, compared with 38% for Bolsonaro. While 44% of respondents said they would never vote for Lula, while 56% 6% said they would never vote for Bolsonaro in that poll. So, but then again, with the way that these things tend to go, you're gonna, if there's somebody else that jumps into the race and ends up being the front runner against Bolsonaro, that could go either way. So seeing that 50% number tied up with Bolsonaro, or 52% or whatever it was, tied up against Bolsonaro, showed promise for that.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, Bolsonaro just, it's weird because his popularity has remained strangely high even as he's bungled the pandemic and bungled this, that, and the other thing, and is, like, from an international perspective, just a terrible president in Brazil, but has still maintained like a pretty high approval rating overall. Like, it's not like it is guaranteed for Lula to come back from this, and his reputation was tainted by the entire scandal. But I just, he was insanely popular when he left office the first time. He had like an 80-some% approval rating.
Slight tangent question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, how can a lot of these rulers who really don't have favorable outcomes for their nations, don't have good policies for their countries, seem to still maintain these high levels of favorability? You could think Orban in Austria. We're talking about like Bolsonaro here. So what is it that these politicians can convince their populaces of, that they're actually doing a good job, when many of us would be sitting here saying like, no, they're not?
Well, a lot of that gets down to just the nature of right-wing populism, where it's cultural appeal. So you have a guy who is running a Latin American country of obvious Italian and German descent, who is preaching hardline Christianity, opposition to same-sex marriage, opposition to pretty much the whole palette of modern liberalism. So his playbook's not really manifestly different than Trump's, and the appeal and the strength of that power is going to be largely driven from those same kind of cultural forces. Whereas objectively, yeah, he's a disaster, but in terms of being able to rally people at a cultural level, that's really all it is. It's just that appeal to national pride and cultural conservatism.
I 100% agree with that. Dylan Burns did just join us. Dylan Burns, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself? I'm sure they're wanting to hear about you and the kind of stuff that you do, and then we can get back into the topics that we're discussing.
Yeah, I'm an international arms dealer. I work mostly in Afghanistan. I enjoy my work very much. You can find my content at Dylan Burns TV. That's DYLANBURNS TV.
Well, I am glad that you have graced us with your presence, Dylan. I've been a huge fan of yours since discovering you on Twitch, and I like the content that you produce, and so I hope to be able to join you more on live, or at least watching you a lot more on live shows and that sort of thing in the future. Just to bring you up to speed, we're talking about primarily Brazil right now and the overturning of Lula's conviction by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court throwing out a lot of the evidence. And we're going to talk pair that up with Maz taking back power in Bolivia.
So the only comments I would really have is, I remember during what the events in Bolivia and the coup, a lot of people made the argument that Evo Morales is authoritarian, and you know what? I will say that he does have a streak of doing things that I would consider authoritarian. But it's very funny to see a lot of people who really care about authoritarianism to have backed up Anna's during this whole time, when she was throwing documents out there to give police immunity to slaughter indigenous protesters, which of course they used to slaughter indigenous protesters. And so I think anybody propping up Anna's or propping up the events of the military forcing Evo to leave as this type of victory of democracy as silly. I don't think democracy is mowing down your own people. It isn't in Bolivia, and it isn't in Myanmar, as we're seeing as of recent. So I think Anna's, while I will say that I have seen some concern about the exact charges being brought against her. I do think there is definitely good reason to put her in a cell, but I think I would actually be more eager to see it due to the immunity she gave police to slaughter protesters than the reasons that they're giving, actually.
No, I 100% agree with that. Just because, I made it a point when I was talking to people on the left in different debate communities and on Twitch and stuff to make it very clear that Morales did overstep his authority when seeking a third term. That's violating the will of the people, even though the Supreme Court which was a lot of his supporters, let's be real, said that it would violated his human rights to seek a third term after people had voted to make that.
What's interesting about that is I find it really sus if you're like, I'm a man of the people. Look, I'll put it up to a vote. Then you lose.
Yeah.
Well, I meant the courts. And then you go to the courts. It just it doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, and I had a ton of people, especially like in my little community that I help run, had come at to me from the left and be like, "Well, you just don't understand Latin American politics." And I'm like, "I don't care. I support democracy. Shut the fuck up." and so like
Tell us what you really think.
It gave cover.
Is it in South America the person who loses a referendum actually wins the referendum? Is that how it works there? It's actually it's like golf in Latin America. Is that how it works?
The highest score wins rather than the lowest, right?
Yeah.
But it gave cover to Inez to do the kind of things that she ended up doing. Inez to do the kind of things that she ended up doing initially. But as soon as the purges started happening, the mass not executions, but the mass arrest and some murders were happening, and that completely lost all credibility and authority. Ultimately, in my opinion, is why she ended up losing.
It's reported the accusations are terrorism and sedition. And then the critique of this is that Inez's arrest is just a distraction from incompetence, and you have Arce now, who's already under investigation. didn't even get a foot in. Copa dumped Arce's party. So now you have Copa hanging around on the field. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players. And then you have this looming shadow of Lula over top of everything. But this is so typical that it's starting to look like a soccer game gone horribly wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I for the intricacies of the Bolivian political dynamics, it somewhat, and this again, an outsider looking in, people correct me if this is wrong, please, seems to be similar to how there's like a wealthy white elite class and a indigenous brown underclass within Bolivia.
You think?
And so,
really?
I mean, and so that seems to be the kind of reason why you have, like Universal said, a football game, and that is way underselling it, or not underselling it, underappreciating the.
It's more like Aztec basketball.
Can anyone help me understand what happened with the mayoral race, where a person left the movement towards Socialism Party, ran on their own, and then achieved a victory? It seemed to be in one of the articles that you had linked through that this was kind of a blow against the Moss Party, but I couldn't exactly get fully informed.
She wins the mayor. She wins the mayoral like by 60%. Dumped the party and went on her own. Same kind of platform and agenda, but independently. It was a landslide by all accounts. So then Arce's like, well, that kind of weakened the party, but that doesn't stop the party.
Did she give any reason for leaving the party?
No.
Yeah, it seemed to be being depicted by the media that this was going to potentially be a blow against the party, but kind of like Cyprus saying a little bit. I just don't know enough about the topic.
They're not talking that it is.
Mm.
They're not talking that way. So either they cut her loose to be a front runner because she was the all-star, who knows, and then she's going to shepherd them in or escort them in once she settles in. It's impossible to tell right now. I'm really wanting to know. I'm sure something's going to come out, but in this climate, you can hardly believe anything you're reading anyway.
And it's fastly moving too. Like, of course, a lot of this stuff happened within the last month or so.
Excuse me.
Despite the fact that it was they called it a coup back last year against the Morales' party. But it's quickly moving now. Like, we're talking like every week there's something new coming out. So this is one of those things that everybody should pay attention to. Even if you're not interested in international politics, it's going to have ramifications for us as a global society, and so you should pay attention to this. I want to get other people's opinions on this, at least with how we are seeing. They called it a pink wave because it's not quite communism, but it's not quite liberalism. It's kind of a mix between the two, and kind of people that analyze the global South. Chase, what are your thoughts about how both the Bolsonaro scenario and the Morales scenario are playing out, and what does that mean in the broader context? What are your thoughts about that?
It's complicated. I think that this actually ties into Brad's question earlier. Like, why was there such broad support for Bolsonaro, and why was there this like sudden spike of right-wing ideology? And at least in Brazil, I think a big part of it is because the faith in small d democracy was like really shaken by the car wash scandal. And that's why I'm very optimistic about I'm optimistic right now about like the general trend, because like faith in democracy seems to be increasingly restored. And you pair that with a COVID reality where people are seeing government services as directly beneficial, and they're seeing more government involvement in their life as a positive thing under these circumstances, that it seems that we are, at least in some parts of the global South, certainly not all, but at least it feels like in Latin America that things are kind of dramatically shifting back to the left after this like right-wing spike.
Well, I think I can agree with that to an extent. Dylan, what about you, man? You're up to snuff on these kind of things. What's your opinion?
Could you repeat that last part for a second? Sorry, you guys cut out for me.
Oh, no problem. What do you think are the ramifications of the pink wave, is what they're calling it, of how the left in South America is seeming to be on a resurgence? Like, why do you think this might be the case, and what are the ramifications for it?
I think when you see how Bolsonaro and other individuals governed, they did not govern effectively. When you give an opportunity, there's the old saying of like, let your opponents fail, don't interrupt them with their failing. And the right in Latin America, and their economic policies, their social policies, their policies to combat crime, they've seemed to have all failed. Bolsonaro has not tackled rejuvenating Brazil's economy effectively. He's not handled COVID effectively. He's not handled any of his scandals effectively, and he is not he's not really even handled crime effectively. And he was a hard-on crime individual. So if you can't even do the basics of being the law and order individual while breaking laws, you're not going to be able to hold a lot of legitimacy in the eyes of many people. But the trend of Bolsonaro seems to be a trend that is prevalent from what I know throughout much of Latin America. And so when you're able to have options like Lula da Silva, the reason why I think he's a lot more popular than other people in this party when they pull him head to head with Bolsonaro is because he's tried and tested. When he was in power, Brazil was doing much better. Brazil was on the up. And once the right got in power, it either stagnated or declined, and then went into multiple crises at the same time. It wasn't crises. That's how you usually judge bad presidencies. It was 6 crises at once, so you forget about them. It was Trumpian almost. So right. I think when you compare the left and right in Latin America, it's almost incomparable. And so I would say the economic conditions, the social conditions, and the pandemic is an opportunity that the left should seize on, and is an opportunity on a silver platter that I hope they seize on.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Dylan said, except for it's only a crime. You're only a criminal if you're on the left and break the law. If you're on the right and break the law, then it's justified morally, so you're not committing a crime.
So that is government overreach. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Universal. Go ahead, Brad.
No, actually, go ahead, Universal.
I want to get your thoughts about this, your broader thoughts as well, Uni, if you don't mind.
My broader thoughts on
the same thing that I asked Dylan. Why do you think the pink wave might be happening here?
Tradition. It's gonna hold its course. It's gonna roll with the changes. Things have to. You have a massive, battle to the death over a goalpost, right? Very deeply buried colonial flag. It's not going to go down. So you're never going to have any movement that isn't met, as I said, like a red flag and a yellow flag. You're not going to have any movement that isn't met with an immediate response. And it's just going to change form as needed, depending. And it's very much strategic, you know. So the leaders come in and they say what they need to say to get where they need to be, and then they drop the ball and they pass it off to someone else. And it's a long-term strategy. It's what they're doing. They're jockeying for position because the goalpost, the flag, okay, is not just going to fall. And that's all. I mean, this is just typical. It's typical. But this is such turmoil. There's been eruptions time and time again with this nation. And yet again, it comes to a head. There are some different factors, different stressors, but the game stays the same. So you had a yellow flag, a red flag. Now we got a pink flag. Okay. I honestly, I mean, I'm not saying to minimize it, but the way that they conduct themselves and their culture, the way they negotiate and don't negotiate, is very, very much a field game. And at this point, you just do a Hail Mary or whatever it takes to get your guy up there and see how long he can last before he's knocked down in another one and another. I mean, you know, and they're just accelerating to the point where I am worried about something becoming codified that's permanent, monolithic. If it swings to tradition, you're going to get a very totalitarian state. And that could happen because of the military, the juntas. I mean, it's so easy. Click, call your cartel buddy. Hey. Go ahead now, Turi.
No, that's a great point. Just wanted to reiterate the fact that unlike in other parts of the world that, you know, the Americans tend to focus on, the military is kind of like a third pillar of political systems within Latin America, and they're always kind of a permanent fixture, the what would be typically considered the deep state. Turing, what was your question, man?
It wasn't a question. It's just I actually don't like labeling this the pink wave. We're talking about the MAS trying to reestablish their footing after being couped, and we're talking about Lula trying to get back into power after being thrown in prison. And there's a few, you know, other like left movements happening in Latin, Central, and South America, but from my like lens of analysis at the moment, it's premature to be saying, okay, this is like the wave or the tide or so forth. There's still, you know, a lot of work to do, a lot of like uphill battling to do, and yeah, I don't. It's wonderful. I'm very happy, you know, for the developments that are coming to fruition. But to give it like a label to try to like you know, say this is maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's a current, you know, maybe there's like a little bit of pink like dye that they put in the ocean like they do for St. Patrick's Day in the rivers or whatever. But I'm not ready in the well to say that this is going to like now the Lula thing, you know, as that election comes to prominence, as it gets picked up in U.S. media, as it maybe goes across like some progressive outlets and so forth. Maybe in the States, you know, people are going to kind of cover it a little bit more. But I think that we're going to have a year or two more of our say, a year or two of Lula, see what else is like happening within the region. Then we can maybe begin to discuss, okay, there's like a little bit of something building.
I think that's a good point. Art, but we haven't gotten to you yet. What are your larger thoughts about this?
Well, so contextually, everywhere since the Monroe Doctrine up through the 20th century, where you had basically this corporate, starting even back with let's say like Smedley Butler, War is a Racket, where he talked about being basically a hitman for capitalism, and you know, throughout the 20th century, where you had this Soviet and U.S. Cold War footing within Latin America. There's just a very long, and for different reasons, very multifaceted arc that basically has, just to get real reductive about it, a couple of trends where you have right-wing authoritarian forces that are aligned with the U.S. and aligned with U.S. corporations, because it's good for stability, it's good for business, and as a general rule, those types of countries were more or less fairly stable because we made them stable, we made them prosperous, and we more or less controlled them. I worked in this for a bit. My last job in defense contracting was with the Merida Initiative, working out of Mexico City. This is basically a program to fund the Mexican government with aircraft, weapons, training, equipment. Delivered about $1.6 billion through, I think, 2017 was the last time that it was reported on. So that's what we do. We basically work with governments and facets that are people we can influence, and everyone else we destabilize. So the reason that you don't see a lot of successful left-wing operations down there is that they're traditionally Soviet aligned, but also they're even before that and even after that they were against capitalism. So you kind of have these just natural forces that, for either geopolitical or economic or any number of reasons, that just happen to come into opposition with the U.S., which also for the last 200 plus years has had a doctrine of controlling this region. So the deck is way slanted against the left in the global south directly, as far as below us, just because it happens to be our backyard. We happen to mess with it, and it's this unfortunate tradition of the Cold War, and then the economic situation of our kind of backyard economic imperialism. That's just all it is. I mean, we're now at a point where we're kind of almost inching past that. It's even silly to say that we are, but we do have this kind of I guess changing point in history where I don't even know quite how to describe it, but it's it's a future that is a little bit different for all of us. But kind of the long and short of it is that you also, unfortunately, have well-funded aspects on the right for a lot of these right-wing governments, and a lot of the forces of the left tend to be from the less educated or less experienced or what have you. They're kind of popular revolts, but you might not have the most competent people. So you might get like a Venezuela situation where the folks who are running it just happen to be incompetent because they're not really from those fields in a lot of cases. They're just not running the government well. Plus the fact that they're being actively messed with from the outside. So you just have a lot of forces that have always been conspiring against the kind of left in the South American region.
I think that's a good point. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can't believe that you would assert that the United States of America had anything other than altruistic intent in anything that it did in Latin America or via the Organization of American States. I mean, I can't believe you would assert that. That's ridiculous.
Well, it's a theory. I mean, just throwing it out there.
The Organization of American States is pretty much, for all intents and purposes, an American puppet regime, I guess, it's a way to go about putting it. Do we think that what we're seeing here is kind of in direct counter to basically American influence, and that's why we partly have these cleaves, or is it deeper than that? Of course. Anybody, please take the floor.
What was the question again?
The cleaves that are happening within Latin America, do we think that that's partly in relation or because of U.S. influence in the region, or does it go much deeper than that?
Cleave.
The schisms between left, right, indigenous populations, the white, etc.
Goes much deeper than that, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, there's great book. There's a good book from Daniel Emerwar about how to fight an empire that talks a little bit about like what the U.S. has done. The Jakarta method from Vincent Bevins was pretty good in talking about the destabilization of Brazil. So there's a lot of examples and a lot of documentation that you can find where the United States directly had a hand in either overthrow, funding narco-terrorism groups, funding right-wing groups, or funding whatever requires,
utilitarian, whatever it takes.
Well, I mean, the best thing for the United States to do is to fund every side, and then you're always going to have the winner. I mean, it's the tried and true tactic.
Yeah. U.S. is on that field playing ball just the way they do.
True.
They're playing that game on their terms. It's an away team, which is to me kind of sort of embarrassing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. The U.S. has had a clear, like, neoliberal agenda in all of Latin America for a really, really long time. And I've joked before about when leftists break the law, it's not, that's when it's breaking the law, and when righties do it, it's not. But, like, if you look at the response of the OAS and the American government and the American press, by the way, like, very consistently, like, every single time it is jumping down the throats of any move towards the left or against neoliberalization. And like, even when we started this discussion, like, remember the first thing that we talked about was like, oh, Lula is still going to be charged in federal court. Like, why is that even the prevailing perception amongst a lot of people? Like, it's not my perception, but that's because I dug like way into like what's going on and what people in Brazil are talking about. But like, why is that the prevailing perception still? Like, people still see him as very likely a criminal when the evidence seems to be that he is likely not. I mean, is it for sure? Am I 100%? No, but it, you know, that's the prevailing perception still.
Yeah, very true. Art, did you wanted to break in with a point?
Just real quick, the book I referenced earlier, War is a Racket by Smedley Butler, which is great. You guys should read it if you haven't had the chance. I just found a quote that I just wanted to throw out here, which, you know, relevant to our point. So he writes, I helped make Mexico and especially Tampico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for International Banking House in 1902 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents.
Wow. Been going on
That's
for
1935,
a very long time.
That's all I'm saying is that this is this seems new to us, but this has just been the way of the world, especially in Latin America, for a very long time.
I was going to say, it's an established tradition.
It really is.
Is there any other things people would like on the panel would like to bring up before we move on to another topic?
I think you should look at COPA.
You mean like go research COPA?
Watch. Eva.
Watch.
I think she's the key. Could be dead wrong, but then again, if I'm right, there you have it. Watch Eva. Watch what she does.
We'll definitely be on top of that. Well, I think we've talked extensively about this topic and covered it fairly well. We have 2 other topics that I wanted to cover directly tonight. They are the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan and the ramifications of that, and the ongoings in the South China Sea. Who would like? Which one do you want to cover now?
I could do either.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and let's do the South China Sea, and then we'll wrap it up with Afghanistan or whatever else we decide to talk about.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't have a news of the weird for us today?
I do not have a news of the weird for the international news like we had yesterday. Maybe for the next one, but I wanted to make sure that we gave this topic the reverence that it deserves. So,
I have the extremism report. That should be entertaining.
The extremist report. All right,
yeah, that should be entertaining as a weird and Anyway, never mind. So China. I love me some China. My favorite thing.
So for people, go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to know what everyone else thought, or when they read this, as they squat there with their 220 Chinese vessels, quote, fishing boats. Does everybody think that, in fact, Duterte was, in fact, too accommodating, and that's what led to this?
Good question.
I mean, that question specifically, I don't know. I don't even understand what the problem is here. So I went and I taught English in China for about 3 or 4 months, and I got it on very good authority from all of my Chinese colleagues that the 9- line, which I believe is now a 10- line, is legitimate, and they have evidence, and all those islands down there belong to China. And I don't even understand why we're having a conversation about this. This is just Chinese fishing boats going and, resting between fishing missions, as they've done for dozens, no, thousands of years. So this is,
China?
It's just what we're doing.
When China decides...
I'll put something out. I live on Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania. I live near mile marker 242 or something. You can drive Interstate 80 all the way to California. But if I were to go clean up the highway, I'm going to clean up the highway at 242. I'm not going to really be talking about what's going on in California. And kind of what I'm like getting at a little bit with the story is I understand the encroachment of borders. I understand taking territory. I understand. I mean, I've looked at the docking of ships. I've looked at the building on the Spratleys and so forth. And do I like it? No, I don't. Can I do much to influence it? No, I can't. If I talk about it too much, can I potentially give talking points to the right? In my opinion, yeah, I think I can. So I don't like the things that they're doing. I don't like the surveillance state. I'm quite skeptical about the RCEP, the digital yuan and so forth. However, I've got potholes that I need to fix here in Pennsylvania. So I've actually stepped back from discussing China as much as I once did before. And trying to like center and focus on, and as everyone was.
He's saying
No, I
he's
think
more
that's
interested right now in what is in his own backyard, which is one of the consternations aimed at leaders in this situation. Okay.
If you had decided to go work on a Filipino organic farm today instead of one in Ohio, I think you'd feel differently, Brad.
No, he has the right to feel that way with what he's invested in my opinion.
I know.
My opinion.
I'm just joking.
You're teasing him. You're picking on him.
I do I think about this all the time because like the biggest political thing that I like guide myself by is I never want my words or actions to become the bullet in the barrel of my enemy. And I've seen so many times, this comment being taken and being like weaponized by that group, or like that comment being like weaponized by this group. So I've really even like stepped back further and think like even more than I did before about each word that I'll try to be using on like topics and such. Because I watch a lot of the Angle with Laura Ingraham. I watch a lot of Outnumbered. I watch a lot of Fox and Friends. I watch a lot of Tucker. I watch a lot of Hannity. And they will troll, T-R-A-W-L, I think is the word I'm looking for. Troll Twitter to find a person that has like 116 followers to grab something out and, turn it into a massive like media scandal. So I appreciate all the people that are able to cover topics like as difficult as this because, my other opinion would be China has just read United States history for about the past like 100 years and been like, okay, well, they did that and that worked out for them, but they did that and that didn't work out for them. So how can we learn from their mistakes and implement it better, versus the way the United States did it before? So
yeah, correct.
I'll stop again.
That's true. I think
it's a narcoid.
You go.
Go ahead, Dylan.
Go ahead.
So I think that when we talk about, I'm sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of echo.
I got it.
Yeah.
You got it?
Okay.
Did it work?
So I think that we need to be careful with our language when discussing such things, because I think we need to be honest, but we should also not use the language that irresponsibly heightens tensions, right? Like I don't like to use words like they've declared cyber war on the United States because of a certain hacking, even though that type of language would be preposterous because cyber war, I mean, we've been hacking them, they've been hacking us, we've been hacking each other forever. Then Israel and Iran have been at war for 20 years now? That the standard for this language is ridiculous. But I think we need to also be honest about the situation. For example, I am not going to pretend or quiet down about how Saddam Hussein gassed and genocided the Kurdish minority just because one day a conservative might bring that fact up, and me bringing attention to it might make the point more effective. I will just try my best to bring it up in a responsible manner. And the facts of the matter is that the Chinese Communist Party claims 80% of the South China Sea, which the international community and basically every legal scholar that isn't allied with the party agrees that is a ridiculous claim. The 9-dash line has no legal basis, and every time they've basically brought this to court, the Scarborough Shoal case is the most obvious example I could bring up to. And these are laws they have signed on to. They've signed on to UNESCO. The laws governing these types of things when it comes to maritime trade and territorial waters, they've signed on to these rules. They agreed to follow these rules, and now they've decided that they're not going to. And I also find it funny. It's not UNESCO. I forget the exact word. It's UNCLOS. Sorry, I get them mixed up. And I was president of Model UN. Who would have thought? So the fact of the matter is, the thing I think we should still bring this up and bring attention to this, because even though it might be weaponized by our opponents, that doesn't mean we should hide the truth. We just need to be able to make sure that we bring it up in a responsible manner and offer what to do. Because I think the reason why when the left is honest about foreign policy issues, it sometimes can get weaponized against them, is we'll say something's an issue, but never like follow up. A great example is something we'll talk about later, withdrawing from Afghanistan. I hear a lot from lefties, and I'll say myself, we need to leave Afghanistan. And then somebody will ask you how, and then we'll all freeze up. We won't have
I got that one for later. I got that one later.
That's true.
We'll never have an answer for how. We'll never
True.
say how we're going to pull out. It's just like Kyle Kalinske will raise his hand and say immediate withdrawal, and it's like that's not how this works. So I think if we be honest about the facts, don't use irresponsible language, and offer proposals on how to deal with these issues, then we can be responsibly talking about these issues. But I do think just throwing facts out there and just kind of leaning back like gotcha libtards is obviously going to be used against us. Or somebody else will take the foundation we built and use it for their own causes. So I think when it comes to the South China Sea issue, or the issues of Xinjiang or Hong Kong, or any number of or the suppression of journalists in China, India, China border skirmish, Bhutan and border skirmishes there. Well, basically, literally just building towns within Bhutanese, or was it Nepal? I believe it was Bhutanese territory. Any of these issues, we need to take the narrative, but then offer a solution, and that's the problem I see here.
Yes.
So when it comes to the South China Sea,
100%.
I think nobody here is going to disagree that what they're doing is against international law. Not only is it against international law, but it's immoral. Just because something's a law doesn't dictate morality, but is it immoral what they're doing? Because they're claiming territory, and instead of listening to arbitrators or agreeing to the laws they signed on to and agreed to, they're just ramming Filipino fishing boats, and fishermen's lives who they've been fishing from these territories for generations. And the amount of nations that are disputing this with them is the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan. Of course, Taiwan has their own bogus claims. Malaysia.
Taiwan doesn't accept the ICJ ruling either.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's true.
So I would say that Taiwan.
And also, I just want to say, do not forget Brunei. Just because Brunei is tiny doesn't mean you should forget it.
Yeah, I did say Brunei.
Oh, did you? Okay,
I thought say Brunei. I always try to remember Brunei because if you have more countries, it sounds better, you know. And then of course Vietnam, all these countries. This is one of the few instances that I can point to on the left where America is technically, when it's from an international standpoint, we're standing up for the right thing here. Yeah. We are standing up for the right thing. Now let's make sure that we don't fuck it up and do the wrong policy. And so we should be honest about what's going on, take the narrative, and then offer good policy. Because if we don't offer good policy because we got two outcomes here. Either we talk about it and we don't offer policy, then the right will take advantage of it. Okay, we don't talk about it at all, and then an actual issue that needs attention doesn't get attention, and that's not going to stop the right from talking about it. And in fact, then they'll just say, why isn't the left talking about this? And there you go. So I think the best thing to do is to talk about it responsibly, with responsible language, not heightening pointlessly the Cold War. Offering and then following it up with solutions on actually how we're going to implement this.
I 100% agree with that. I think one of the things that I run into with talking with the left broadly about specifically the Chinese government issue and what they're doing is the fact that they're unwilling to admit that it's imperialism. And only focusing, and then always when they do admit, they're like, well, the United States can't say shit about it, and therefore just shut up. And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues with that. So,
yeah, I mean,
there is also a point that you can go on.
Yeah, let me go on because I find your reactions and responses utterly baffling. Since I am a journalist and I do work with UNESCO, and I've got a history of trying to deal with China in negotiations. When they claim something is theirs, they mean it's theirs and they're going to take it and nothing can stop them. And they are imperialists. They make no bones about it. America cannot speak with strength to China at this time. They mean it. They feel it's their time. It's their chance to be number one. They've historically claimed these territories. They see all of these territories as children who wandered away and are disrespectful, and so therefore they're there to remind them and know there's nothing you can do to dissuade them. The Philippines has said get out, and the U.S. wants to back the Philippines. So in looking at that, you have to imagine in your head the scenario of, okay, the Julian Felipe Reef, here's the United States back in the Philippines trying to get into it with China. China will not withdraw those ships.
No.
Is
Not without
Duterte
force.
much
Will
better
not.
than Xi Jinping?
Can you repeat that, Brad?
Is Duterte much better than Xi Jinping?
Oh no.
Doesn't
No,
it doesn't
that's
even matter.
also a problem.
Yeah.
The question also, are they actually trying to construct another artificial reef? Is there an opportunity for the U.S. to finally cooperate with China in some way?
It
On
does
something
appear that
productive?
that's the case
Yeah.
to me.
Because China is like this. China will keep its enemies very, very close to it. It keeps its allies far, far away. The U.S. has been kept at arm's length because of that. I'm waiting for this shift. If the U.S. starts to get pulled into China, then we know we've become officially its enemy. Is that really what people want?
I don't think it is what people want. Like, people don't want direct conflict. I think the idea that
Unless
China
they think they can
has-
win.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of. But nope, everyone realizes how destabilizing that would be. I don't think anybody is going to like actively push. Okay, I shouldn't say anybody. No, none of the reasonable people who agree with folks like us are going to be pushing for active conflict with China. I don't think. But I just want to say, like, the idea that China has 200 boats like parked on a sandbar, like, it's not a barge party. It's clear what they're doing. They're doing the exact same thing that they did at the Scarborough Shoal. Like, it's just a repeat.
Artificial island. Because they put $400 billion into Iran right now and have told the U.S. that they better drop these sanctions. I believe that this is.
I yelled at conservatives
emboldenment.
for 2 years that the sanctions that the United States put on Iran was going to drive Iran directly into the hands of China.
Correct.
They did a currency swap.
Correct.
They
Yes.
swapped Iranian currency for yuan. They're extending the One Belt One Road. It's a $400 billion investment over 25 years. They're buying oil in yuan. And I've gotten into it with many people on Twitch about this one.
I'm
don't
with
know,
you, and I
Trump
told
is
you
doing
so.
such a great job sanctioning Iran, but it was completely the wrong thing to do.
Oh,
I
100% agree with that.
Agree.
Well,
And I think that's what this is about now.
I have a question for Dylan, because you brought up a really great point that we have to, talk about it and then like offer solutions. So I'm kind of a little bit curious. What would be some of the things that you would put forward as to, maybe deal with some of the things that people would be considering issues?
So there is something that Biden has been doing recently, and I'm terrible with acronyms, as I showed earlier already. But there is a group, I believe it was India, New Zealand, Australia. Does anybody? Does ringing any bells for anybody? It was a recent meeting.
Are you talking about the TPP?
Not the TPP.
Are you talking about ASEAN?
Maybe, but there's a group.
No, I don't think that's it.
Talking about the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, I think, APEC.
Maybe,
but it's like
Biden. We haven't had a meeting between these people in this specific group in like 30 years. Biden has renewed meetings with these organizations, like person to person, actually talking about these issues. And I think multilateralism is the way to tackle this. I don't think a Trumpian model was ever going to work here, and this is why I argued endlessly with Trumpian conservatives. The idea that a kind of unilateral approach to China is the exact thing that would make us eventually have to fall out, because there's no way when we are halfway across the world we're going to be able to maintain a similarly military presence, uncooperative with other people in the region to actually either protect Taiwan or uphold international law. We're not going to be able to do this while drawing out of international organizations. We're not going to be able to do this while blatantly disregarding international law and disrespecting allies. So I would say that we build upon previous successes, freedom of navigation operations, for example, and we negotiate with allies like the Philippines to actually include more nations in freedom of navigation operations. Continue to build economic ties with the nations involved. I would propose a free trade agreement with with Taiwan, for example, in case China tried to use economic coercion in order to try to force them into a position. Now, a free trade agreement with Taiwan would not be enough to to stop any type of economic impact from China hitting hard. But if that does occur, and the Taiwanese people have shown pretty clearly in the past few elections and all polling data and the development of their own identity, that they want, and their own system, that they do want to be independent. So I think in the case that the pressure does come up, they should have somewhat of a cushion there. And that's what I think a free trade agreement with the United States could be there. So I would say working with allies in the region, building on the success of the freedom of navigation operations, and giving the nations who could feel the most pressure from China support through mutually beneficial agreements. This is a general model. Now, for the specific framework, the one I was going to talk about was, I just can't remember the name of the organization. Was India, New Zealand, and Australia, but I forget the exact name of the organization. So there's a general framework we could work with.
We'll have to look that one up because I'm not.
I was actively trying to
that.
find it. It's definitely not APEC, but we'll keep looking for it. I want to just add on, I'm also a multilateralist. Obviously, I don't know if any of us are going to disagree with that, but I just want to add on, that's why
That's what that flag means.
I keep talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think that it was a disaster that we pulled out of that and just gave.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking really not just about the South China Sea. We're talking about China as a neo-colonialist, neo-imperial power and how to combat that reality, right? That is what we're actually talking about. And I think joining things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, negotiating our way in there is crucial. It's really sad that we didn't get in there the first time, because that was the entire point of the agreement, is to diminish these countries in the region's economic dependence on China, and give the U.S. a leg up in the region. There was a bunch of other stuff. People complained about intellectual property, this and that. It would have been great for that specific purpose.
I just think overall we have completely, absolutely, stupidly dropped the ball in understanding our precarious position as a potential ally. China with Iran is still holding out, waiting to see what we're going to do. We seem to want them to be an enemy, and rather than team up and shore up resources against them just in case, shit, you're a Pax, for God's sake, go over there. Sometimes to take the upper hand, you have to mediate what the knight is trying to do on his own territory. But I don't think we have the political savvy. I don't think we have the communicative competence, and we certainly don't have a foreign policy capable of dealing with something like this.
Oh, no,
you don't need to crush the giant.
The thing is,
the
U.S. has the most capable foreign policy, the most capable State Department, and the most capable people in foreign policy in the world. Things happen in international negotiations as a result of the work of the U.S. Things progress because the U.S. puts resources into it progressing. This is just happened over and over and over again with tons of international agreements.
It's not working with China.
That's just it. We're getting our ass kicked because China,
what I mean is, China may be a formidable challenge that we simply aren't prepared for, especially with the last 4 years of total distraction.
I mean, we're not prepared even just from a pharmaceutical and rare earth metal position.
Correct.
That's true too.
We really need to realize that I'm going into a poker hand and I don't even have a pair. But
that's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, environmentalists might be pissed off about what I'm about to say, but wouldn't some of the rare earth metals that exist in China be also within the sand dunes that are in the western area of the United States?
I've heard the United States is pouring in about $25 billion into trying to spin up a couple of rare earth mines by 2024.
Yeah. This is going to be
isn't there also an issue with Greenland? The whole reason Trump had the whole Greenland situation is because of the very valuable rare earth metals there.
Yes.
And as far as I'm aware, I don't see Greenland starting a Maoist revolution anytime soon. So I think we have other options, but the question is, can we develop those other options enough to not have to be dependent? But again, the last thing I want to do,
there's a global
the last thing I want to do though is decouple. I don't want to decouple from China. I feel that's a scary future I don't want.
True.
Yep,
And
agreed.
so the whole idea of while we should be safe and have some precautions in check and develop some industries for necessary defensive purposes and strategic purposes, the last thing I want to do is decouple from China, which I don't know why every time I say this I get a lot of pushback online. But the reason why is if you are a multilateralist, if you believe in the idea of like liberal internationalism of any stripe or any type of internationalism, you need to be able to look forward and say trade between states, international organizations, and having relations through those organizations between states, having more neutral mediators between states, and having immigration, student exchange programs, all these things decrease the likelihood of conflict for a multitude of reasons. And if we don't want a war with China, I think we need to be able to find a balance between challenging them in areas that are of strategic and humanitarian importance to us and like real importance to us, while also making sure we don't decouple and spiral the situation out of control.
And only an ally can do that because China will not listen to anyone else.
So one of the theories that we are kind of Art, please go ahead. You've been putting your hand up a bit, so you're muted.
Oh,
Yeah, good point. So just because earlier we were kind of conflating two things about Chinese imperialism, you do have these two sort of related but actually kind of different issues. One is Taiwan itself, and then the rest is kind of their regional ambitions. So in terms of Taiwan itself, that's like super complicated in that the history of Taiwan, even going back hundreds of years, was always in dispute. Japan's claimed the land since the 1580s. The various times the Dutch, the Spanish, the French, Portuguese have all laid claim to it. The Chinese actually lost control of it in, I want to say, 1895 or so to the Japanese. So they didn't actually get it back till the end of World War II, and then immediately thereafter, the Chinese communist uprising overthrew the nationalists, and the nationalists basically fled to this piece of land that they never actually owned up until very, very recently. True. So you have two governments that exist that both claim to be the rightful government of China, of all of China, and you have this war which basically has never ended. There's not actually even an armistice or any formal end to the Chinese Civil War. So while it's certainly not a hot war at this point, you have this sense in mainland society of the war will never really be over until Taiwan's brought back into the fold. So this isn't something they're ever going to forget or they're ever going to get over. Independence is not really an option in terms of what the mainland will tolerate. It's a very thorny situation, and that one's a little bit different than. And even looking at it in terms of an invasion, you have a space of 110 miles between the mainland and Taiwan, which makes it an order of magnitude more difficult than the Normandy landing, which was about 20 miles from the English Channel. So you have this massive military buildup. They're constantly putting pressure on Taiwan, but the actual type of military involvement that would take to successfully invade Taiwan is off the charts. Like it's questionable if it could even be done, even with their type of economic advantage, especially with the wild card of the U.S. What we might do to interfere with it. So there's this just unworkable tension there, and then you have the rest of the region where China also has ambitions for. They have intents on expanding throughout. Even as they're kind of pushing through, and they once pushed through Tibet, but Xinjiang, and then you have even the eastern parts of Russia. The Southeast Asia. There's other areas down there that they've have some maps that are very aggressive. Right. Let's say the Philippines. A lot of this stuff for Greater China, down the road that they kind of see as rightfully their domain, and at some point they're going to expand into that. That's the kind of thing that needs to be opposed. That's just straight up imperialism, and they are absolutely on that path. The issue with Taiwan's it's a different one because you have two active governments that claim to be the rightful ruler of China. And that needs to be resolved diplomatically, hopefully. But ultimately, that's not something that we can just simply wave away as anti-imperialism and just put a stop to it. It's just complicated.
I would say that when you say it's intolerable, I would say in response that strategic conditions quickly make the intolerable tolerable. Whether we like it or not, there it is. Right. A great example would be the state of the DPRK. the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. I just want to say democratic because, I mean, they made so many great strides in democracy.
You say we'll rule again.
To them, it is intolerable, the idea of a divided Korea. It is intolerable, the idea that there is a North and South Korea, one owned by the military of the imperialist blood-sucking Americans. 1 second, I need to get a shot of blood. That is intolerable, but the strategic conditions they are under currently has made it so it has to be tolerated. So quickly, those strategic conditions have made the intolerable tolerable. There's multiple states in the world. Sudan. A South Sudan is intolerable to this guy. Well, now it's tolerated. There's many instances in history where a government stands up and says, this is an intolerable position, the idea that this could ever happen, but quickly it became tolerable. And the more time passes, the more tolerable it slowly kind of seeps in. So, and the more strategic positions entrench as well, the more the more military deals we make with Taiwan, the more trade agreements we make with Taiwan, and the more nations we get involved in, say, freedom of navigation operations, could make an intolerable situation, well, not publicly tolerable, privately tolerable.
Acceptable.
And so I would say that it is. I would view it as an extremely deeply held core issue for the state. But the idea that it is that anything like this is ever inseparable, when we know the costs it would deem to the state, the occupation that would be necessary, how more and more distant culturally and politically the Taiwanese people are becoming, much more than Taiwan, much more than Hong Kong. I would say it isn't even comparable. The different amount of freedom and cultural separation that has gone with time. There's also been an indigenous people in Taiwan that people never mention that have their own culture, their own ways of life. There's another thing that's distinct. If you pull the people, many of them have been very blatant about their abilities, that their personal want, that if an invasion ever happens, they will defend it. And then if you back it with right now, while we all will say maybe 10 or 20 years from now it'll change, the United States is the most powerful military force to ever exist in the history of the planet. And if we take a multilateral approach, we could make this intolerable situation tolerable due to strategic conditions.
Yeah, man, I have the power to do that.
I have a question about the most powerful military force. At what point do we cross the threshold that cyber power can equal or near hard power? Like how close are we getting that keyboard warriors are reaching near levels of power that actual like firing weapons and so forth would be?
I think that's a great question, and that is going to be one that depends on what the strategic goal is of the use of the cyber power. We could write viruses that could blow up electronics inside systems that cause plane tracks and stuff
nuclear facilities.
Exactly. So there's a ton of leeway there, but I think this brings up an interesting point, and we kind of danced around it a little bit when we're talking about looking for solutions to problems that the left typically doesn't want to do or doesn't have the wherewithal to actually go down these things. And one of the things that I like to harp on, especially when dealing with international relations, is that it's one giant prisoner's dilemma for the most part. And the proven strategic way to end a prisoner's dilemma from like a negotiating standpoint and a kind of like strategic standpoint is tit for tat with reciprocity. So what you potentially do is that if somebody hits you, you hit them back. It goes back and forth a little bit, but eventually you're like, okay, we're going to take a step back. We're going to readdress the situation. Let's try to talk these things through. So with these boat situation, and this is probably a hot take that people are going to disagree with me. I think one of the things that we could do is actually in partnership with the ASEAN states, which were the ones that we listed way back when. So it's Australia, the Philippines, Brunei, Taiwan, Thailand, etc. All these states within Southeast Asia, just go and commandeer the boats.
No.
Why?
Oh, I mean, the outcome of that is probably disastrous.
It's flying too close to the sun. I've done that sometimes in my life before, and you burn your eyebrows, you burn your arm hair or something. Yeah, I would be hesitant to do something that aggressive.
It is very aggressive, but is it really that much aggressive than what China's doing, building artificial islands and putting missile silos on all of them and warplanes and the ability to hit states
I would
from
say yes,
with
because
rocket
now
attacks?
we're dealing with like there's people on the vessels. Now we're going to have to deal with like, okay, how are we going to do like that kind of exchange and so forth? It's going to be such a black stain on the like reign of Xi Jinping that I think that he would take it very badly. I can't understand all of the ramifications of it this quickly in my mind, but it sounds very dangerous to me.
I mean, that escalates this from cold to hot pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I like, how do you come back from that level of escalation is my question to you. Like,
no.
because
So then how do we
address
that? Well, I think what Dylan's bringing up is exactly how you address it. These freedom of navigation lessons are already spitting in the face of China's efforts. And if you expand them and bring way more people on board and couple that with a bunch of other efforts to undermine China's relations in the region, then you make long-term progress. And I think Dylan is like right on the money here, like comparing some of this stuff to South Sudan. Like, this is a long-term game. And people, when they first started talking about independence of South Sudan, said it's going to cause all of these African borders to fall apart. Everything's going to be terrible. Everything's going to be completely fall apart. And the idea of like Taiwanese independence right now kind of feels the same way. And the idea of China not just being able to take control of the entire South China Sea kind of feels that way right now. But if we engage in these things in the long term, not 2 or 4 years at a time, then we make progress.
I would also like to say that when we talk about it culturally, the Tsai Ing-wen says we don't need to declare independence. We're already independent.
It's true.
So that's also, in my opinion, a great little like do-si-do around the question. I love that.
Go ahead, Art.
So just real quick, the complication is that you have the idea of sovereignty that China, the People's Republic, claims over Taiwan, and you have I just completely lost my thread. I'm sorry. I was going somewhere with that.
I'll jump in and kick it back.
All right.
Dylan, I completely agree with your approach on multilateralism. The only thing that I would add in, and if a person wants to try to, change some of China's actions or so forth, I think the only way to do it would be through concerted boycotts. I'm against sanctions. I don't find sanctions to work. I think that they always trickle down to citizenry. I think that if you actually wanted to do anything, you would have to figure out ways to boycott certain items, certain goods, and so forth, and economically affect the bottom line that way. But I don't support sanctions in any capacity. I'm sure that you can give me a scenario where I'll support a sanction, but 99.5 times out of 100, I'm not going to do it.
I was just going to bring up Magnitsky sanctions as an example of a type of sanction, which I personally am extremely supportive of.
Yeah.
I have not seen anybody put on that list of a person on that list that I disagree with. Not a single individual, whether it be how this is the way that we make it so our nation is not personally at all supporting financially through our infrastructure individuals as the direct individuals involved in genocide. Those would be a type of sanction I would support. And there's another example I would probably sanction I would support. A great example would be recently, of course, Myanmar / Burma. I'm not going to get into it. The military companies that Biden actually started to sanction. These are companies which primary goal is to take in money for the military, which then is used against rebel groups, used against protesters, used to support a military junta, and its own people is requesting for us to put pressure on. The whole reason many of these protesters are putting their signs in English and broadcasting to the world is because they believe they need international attention to this to continue the pressure. And I think if I will say that the sanctions, widespread sanctions of the economy, can have devastating effects. Blockades, I have a very similar view of. I think fuel blockades, while of course they can cripple military efforts, a lot of people don't realize how important fuel is in running hospitals, in transporting food. Fuel is an important resource not only for conducting war, but basic infrastructure. A great example would be the fact that while the United States denies it, the Saudi Arabian government fuel blockade has not allowed any ships to go into Yemen for about 2 months, and it has caused a lot of food that is actually getting in through humanitarian efforts to not be transported properly. So I would say that it really depends on the situation and the type of sanction. because sanctions for I think a lot of people think it's like the switch where you pull it down and the economy makes no money, or you have it up and the economy makes all the money for all the terrorisms, and that's like the two options. Which I think I see it as like a tool, and I think the importance is precision and exactly the purpose you're trying to use the sanction for.
I agree with what you said about with Myanmar and the military aspect. My follow-up question would be to anybody: what level of impact do we think Magnitsky sanctions would have against individuals within the CCP, if any? Because I'm sitting here.
We've already placed them, actually. We've placed them on specifically Hong Kong officials. Carrie Lam has Magnitsky sanctions placed against her. Xinjiang officials who are involved in what's going on in Xinjiang. We've placed these before. And the point of these sanctions is not the idea that this is going to switch all policy. It really is to make it as difficult for the individuals and people who are legislating these things as difficult it is for them to function in the international marketplace.
They should just buy Monero.
What was that?
Again?
They should just buy Monero. It's an untraceable crypto asset.
Oh, okay. Hey, I'm
buy them Monero. Got it.
A funny story about that. I was actually recently sponsored by cryptocurrency, and I was given the offer the day after I tweeted, "Crypto seems absolutely worthless." And the day after, I was offered a sponsorship by cryptocurrency. It's like, you know what? I think I've changed my mind.
Art, did
I
you?
think you're doing better with
I'm
the
sorry.
Vikings.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, so just to go back to my point, which I completely lost my thread on. So the issue with Taiwan is just, over the long arc of history, they're losing. So they lost their UN seat. The Taiwanese actually used to sit on I should say the Republic of China, used to sit on the UN Security Council until 1971. Then they were replaced by the People's Republic of China. So back then, Taiwan was a recognized, major government, in terms of, UN member states. Now, out of 193-ish member states, I think about 14 recognize Taiwan, and we are not one of them. So they have this long, slow war of attrition that the People's Republic is winning. And they're really winning on all fronts: diplomatic, economic, military. And the Republic of China is just getting smaller and smaller. And I guess my point earlier when I was saying intolerable, I mean, you can get to tolerate anything if you're in that position, but the Chinese are not in that position. They're a large authoritarian state that is propagandizing the people to believe something. And they basically made it a cultural foundational point that they need to reacquire Taiwan. So it's more likely that the Taiwan's going to be forced in the position of having to tolerate Chinese rule than the other way around. So
that's why
I think that
shift, right? That's why I would propose all these multilateral shifts. That's why I would propose these free trade agreements. That's why I would propose all of this shifting, because like we just said, the same way that it would be, like you just said, the same way it would be, to me, it's intolerable, the idea of Taiwan having to give up its democracy, do this one country, two systems things that would eventually fall under the same way Hong Kong has. It would eventually lead to their democracy being stolen from under them and that independent identity squashed. We see how important it is to have a concrete identity and a concrete kind of unifying message in areas like Xinjiang, for example. So I am very worried about that. But of course, if the strategic position mandated it, I would have to make that intolerable situation tolerable for myself. I'd have to live with it. And so that's why I'm proposing all of these things. That's why we can't just talk about these things and be like, oh, this is scary. We need to propose solutions, which is why building on freedom of navigation operations, taking a multilateral approach, starting these these trade agreements with Taiwan and other states in the region, rebuilding economic ties, not only look at this as a strategic positioning in the Pacific, but including the Indo-Pacific in our wider strategic range. So I agree with you. I just think that's why we need to do an Uno reverse card as soon as possible.
Yeah, I actually think I think you're overstating it, Art. I think I mean, I guess I largely agree with your point, but I'm almost shocked that things haven't changed as much in Taiwan. Like, its status and its assertion of independence have been pretty strong, pretty consistently for like a very long time. And if we project that out into the future, I think of like, if a situation is what it is for long enough, we just accept it eventually. Like, look at Western Sahara. We just eventually were just like, okay, it's just part of Morocco. Fine. Like, that's basically what is happening now.
Even though the UN said they're supposed to have a vote.
Yeah.
Well, the United States was one of the only countries to recognize that.
But the United States is the only one that needs to, though. Let's be
Well,
real.
it's also,
But,
let's be
like,
honest, like somebody has to
look
move
at-
on it, right? There has to be an action taken. So if the position is kind of a stalemate, then the onus would be on the Chinese government to act to take Taiwan.
Exactly.
Right?
And
I
they
guess
haven't.
the obvious
And
is the
that's
tiny
thing.
island off of its shore, but anything outside of that, in my mind, like strategically, would take an immense political will, military will, financial will to go out there and take all the risks associated with it. So we need to make it as physically difficult, as financially difficult, and as diplomatically difficult as possible.
So what we do
Well,
then
China's
is mine the sea or the strait that separates the two, right?
Well, it's not just the sea, though. China's a threat to all of their neighbors. I mean, they absorbed
Correct.
half of Mongolia. They absorbed Tibet. They're in the process of completely, culturally, linguistically, everything, eradicating their Uyghur
Uyghurs.
population. But it's not just limited to them. They launched a brief war against Vietnam in 1979. The Vietnamese absolutely beat the shit out of them. And this is actually after the era of Mao, where he had taken all ranks out of the PLA. So basically, officers weren't allowed to command enlisted or vice versa. You were all supposed to work together. They'd actually made they were military communists, whereas the Vietnamese were like hardcore battle hardened, and they just absolutely stomped the PLA and kicked them out within a month. So, but this is it's familiar territory for all their neighbors. They realize that China is ascendant, they're nationalist, and they're very like ethno-nationalists. So any losses that they suffer to China won't just be territorial loss, but they're going to be assimilated, basically by the Borg. So, I mean, this is the play that China is running, where they want, even within China, they're trying to make Mandarin the national language and replace even a lot of the regional dialects and really make that more of like, hey, this is what you speak in business, as we speak
Big
in
issue
school.
in Mongolia right now.
True.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So,
Can I ask you guys a quick
there's this.
question on this thread?
Sure.
I'm just curious. So I've increasingly started to see China as basically a Han Chinese ethno state.
Yes.
And
Sure.
is that just factual reality? Am I wrong?
No, it's more or less correct. It's not there
Ethno
yet.
state, I
They've
would
tried
call
to
it.
Hunify the other ethnicities within, like the. Oh man, I'm gonna butcher it. Is it the Yui, the other Muslim ethnic minority population within
UA.
China?
Yeah.
UA,
in the
yeah.
Southwest. Yeah.
Yeah, so they've kind of Hunified the UA, but not entirely. And as long as that works, they won't right now push for it, but it's getting there. Art is the resident expert from CSP, so he can expand upon that more.
But yeah, just to agree with that, yes, and especially as they become more of a techno-authoritarian state. I mean, a lot of that's just be pushed out through technological means in terms of like not just education, but how you're forced to basically live and operate on a day-to-day basis in a business sense. They're going to make it more of a Mandarin, Han ethno state, exactly like you're saying, and try to reformat. And it's going to be a weird totalitarian state, and it's actually kind of a terrifying thought once they get it up and running. What it's going to represent, and it's going to need a buy-in from all the neighbors to want to resist it.
Yes. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, if we're kind of like drawn to a close on this topic, which it kind of feels that we've all kind of like said our parts, I might have the weird news of the day that ties into this one.
All right, cool. Let's do it. Let's hear it, Brad. Thank you.
So some people are going to have to check like some of the details in this one, but I'm going to get the story mostly correct. I believe that Taiwan is known for a certain type of pineapple. If anybody has heard about it, they make like a special pineapple and it's very, very good. So supposedly China eventually got seeds of that pineapple and they took it back to mainland and they're trying to develop it and, develop all these farms and everything. And eventually I think China came out and said, we're no longer going to import pineapples from Taiwan. And Taiwan exported almost, a massive amount of their pineapples to there. So the Taiwanese government and Xing Wen, sorry, I got the name wrong. They put out like a nice meme campaign of how like everybody should be, making their pineapple cakes and eating pineapple and all this kind of stuff. And the people of Taiwan, I think they bought out an entire year's worth of pineapples via saying like, okay, I'll buy this one, that one's ready, I'll buy that one, that's ready, within like 12 or 24 hours of this taking place. And it became like a kind of like a fun, cute little story within Taiwan. So weird news of the day, Taiwanese people bought up a lot of pineapples.
That's the kind of
Wow.
stuff that you would see, during other kinds of wartime stuff when populations
By war
are
bonds,
war bounds. It's the same kind of thing. I love it. Like I just quickly Googled it, and 420,000 tons of pineapple annually. So
And the
that's how
memes are
much
really
they
great
produced.
too.
So
I'm just really glad that I finally have another reason to bolster my correct opinion that pineapple absolutely belongs on
yes,
pizza.
pineapple does go on pizza. 100% agree.
Yep, it does.
Sorry,
know what
Afra,
goes on
But
if
it
you're
goes
watching.
on pizza with French dressing.
Anything that you want to put on it.
So it's the pineapple rebellion, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
But yeah, I
yes.
thought that was
So, like,
a
Buy
good fun
freedom.
story.
Buy freedom pineapples.
Could you just see, like, all of a sudden, all the haute couture, it's everything pineapple this year, and so they're going to be sick of it. That's going to be a thing. It's going to be a moment in an
Oh
encyclopedia.
wow!
that
I'm
everything
gonna
went
go ahead
pineapple.
and throw this link up on the system here
I
because
think they made songs. I think
up,
they had dances.
they came up
It was
with other
everywhere.
stuff too. Whereas the AP
And also,
News.
I think Taiwan was the nation that had a very fun time with their COVID-19 mask videos and so forth. They use that
Yes.
one. Are they the nation that uses a dog in all of their government
I
marketing?
think so. So I think that's correct too. I'm going to go ahead and drop this link across all our social media. So this is the way they created a pushback for after pineapple's banned from China. And it seems like they're having media frenzies, like we've already talked about, coming up with upside down pineapple cake, different recipes to try it out, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to head and drop this in there, but I wanted to flash it on the screen really quick just because it sounded really cool. So, go ahead and pop
So you
that
know how
too.
Winnie the Pooh got banned because people were
Yes.
using it to make fun of she? I think that if they really want to like make progress on this, is they need to start saying like pineapple is the pro CCP fruit. And then they're going to win the pineapple. war.
Yep.
It'll be a psyop. That's the way they have to do it.
I don't know, man. You can just say that Winnie the Pooh eats pineapple with his honey and make it
see,
double.
but then the
Right, that's the counter right there.
Wow.
But
All
then
right.
pineapple's going
Well,
to
we've evolved into Winnie the Pooh memes. This is truly high level.
Oh, yeah.
It always ends there.
My,
That's when you
my
move
chat
on.
is complaining about the pineapple on pizza. We're being shamed.
Listen,
fine.
no.
As
Oh,
well you should
however-
be. True.
They're all about the help Taiwan drink pina coladas. They'll go for that.
Okay.
that's fine.
Ah.
But
I will-
listen,
We got to
these-
make a Taiwanese pina colada. Let's do it.
Yeah, with
On this
pizza.
cast, we'll get it done.
These savory pizza absolutists are absolutely ridiculous. A food doesn't have to be just savory, okay? You can have sweet versions of a food. It's totally acceptable. Get over yourselves.
I mean,
I'm all about
was
pizza
a pie.
essentialism.
No, I'm all savory.
All right, I
pineapple?
think we've
There's the one
covered
true pizza.
Oh no.
The master
no soup
pizza.
for you. No pizza for you, right?
Ugh.
I just dated myself.
True.
God, give myself some lashes for that one. But I think we've covered China pretty extensively now. So our final not necessarily final topic, depends on if people can stay. But the other big topic I wanted to cover was the
Afghanistan.
American troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. For anybody that may not know, and I hope that's very few people that watch this, is that the Trump administration last year made a deal exclusively with the Taliban government in order to withdraw all U.S. troops and get all allied troops out of Afghanistan by I can't remember the date.
I think it's May 1st of 2021.
May 1st.
May 1st.
Yeah, May 1st. So out of Afghanistan by May 1st. The only concessions that seem to have been made by the Taliban was that we won't be another terrorist state for the world. That's it. There have been no concessions to either the Afghan government or to the U.S. government about maintaining women's rights, maintaining schools, universities, or any of this other stuff. It was a very, very Trumpian Republican play to get out of Afghanistan, and I think it is going to be an absolute clusterfuck for everybody involved, and that is why we need to talk about it. The floor is yours. Please, Brad, go ahead.
I'll be quick, and I'm just going to go back to the conversation that I had with you, Universal Discourse, and Kingfisher Games a long time ago.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I mean, we destabilized a region. We blew up all the infrastructure, turned large swaths of territory over to the Taliban. There's no. I mean, I was looking at the numbers of attrition of police officers in Afghanistan. The security posts are being abandoned, and there's not going to be an ability to have Afghanistan. In my opinion, I don't think that there's an ability for a unified state. It just seems to be so cut and carved up, going all the way back to Sykes-Picot, going back to the recent conflicts and so forth, that I don't exactly understand how this peace deal is going to work. I didn't like it back then. I don't like it now. I do have a solution. I'll save my thoughts of a solution for a little while and give the mic to others.
I have a weird perspective on this. So I work in international development. I have worked for multiple organizations now that have projects in Afghanistan where they're trying to build local capacity. The level of local capacity there, not just in terms of security, but in terms of all kinds of things, is shockingly low. When we have like education projects or job projects that we want to implement, even when we are actively trying to find local people who can run those projects, it is just shockingly difficult. So even when it is extremely expensive, like prohibitively expensive to do so, we keep sending expats, American expats and third country nationals to run those projects because there is nobody in the country who can run them effectively. And this is also true on the criminal side. If you look at the the security reports that came out, the ones I'm talking about, the FOIA requests got all those interviews, yada, yada, yada. I mean, you had people saying like, hey, the people we're training are like thieves and ill-equipped to advance the security of the state and the capacity of the government to, control the territory. But it's just true of like everything right now. So like if we're going to leave right now, the capacity for the government to sustain itself is not there.
Oh, that is not at all surprising. Having been deployed to Afghanistan for a year, that has been my opinion about withdrawal since forever. But it's also one of those situations where maybe it's time to go, but I don't know. Universal Discourse, I'd very much like to hear your opinions on this, given the fact that you have also worked in these areas, such as myself in art, and Chase on that as well.
Harsh. You're bringing all these warlords back to the table.
True.
Why? None of you have the ability to mediate for that. Saleh, decide on our troops, but you can't decide for Afghanistan. Fair enough. Ghani, Khalilzad is just dreaming. I want to know who is the assigned mediator for this one. To get the troops out, 10,000? U.S.-backed NATO troops. They want them out by May 1st. If they were specific on exactly who they wanted out, because the way it's presented is the U.S. has to go. That's not exactly what's going on. So it looks like there's a lot of posturing in a situation like this. It's always going to be. So if you took that off the table, you can't. God, look what was done to them. I mean, if the U.S. came in with assistance, aid, things that they actually needed and wanted, and went ahead and let them put themselves back together, again, try to be an ally. You left it in pieces. Go ahead and back out and leave them to clean up the mess. They're so vulnerable to influence. You're still talking about the Taliban. I mean, I can't even sit there and go down rabbit holes and split hairs with this. Look what you fucking did to them.
Yeah.
Look what you did to them.
So I think a perspective that needs to be shown is what a lot of people don't know is a lot of people will speak on behalf of the Afghani people, like on like what they think or what they really want and how the Taliban represents them, obviously, because they're still winning or da-da-da-da. We have publicly available polling data on what exactly the people of Afghanistan think of the peace deal, what they want to be in the peace deal, what they want Afghanistan to look like. 85% of Afghanis want women's rights enshrined in the peace deal. 85%.
Yep.
That is something that
in
is
there.
intolerable by the Taliban. The
There you go.
vast majority, like it's like 87% of Afghanis hate the Taliban, and of the 11% who like them, 1/4 of them, when asked, can't tell you why they like the Taliban. So, and
Well,
all the polling data shows that the Taliban is much more hated than
Yeah.
the United States military presence. Yet we
For a
continue to fail miserably.
Yeah.
And it's due to a combination of us lying about the condition of our operation, us developing an oligarchy with investing way too much money into failed projects, ghost soldier problems, lack of motivation. There's a million issues that I could bring up. But there's this one instance I could actually particularly highlight where we wanted to deal with, the whole drug problem, as we all know Afghanistan has. And there were local farmers who were farming opium. And the British offered this: if we will pay you to burn your opium. Seems like a decent solution. But then what they would do is they'd burn the opium, grow more, and just burn more next season to make more money off the British. And so the Americans, we saw that and we were like, well, that's very stupid. We're just going to go through and burn all the opium. And so we went through, burnt it all, no compensation. And of course, that builds sympathy with the Taliban, because if you're just burning the locals' crops, they're not going to take that very kindly. And you can see blunder after blunder after blunder through that entirety of the Afghanistan war. But today, the condition basically is that the majority of Afghans want us to leave after a secure peace deal. And then when we pull them on what they want in the peace deal, it's stuff that the Taliban has not conceded, like women's rights.
Right.
But these are people, citizens, whom the Taliban nor does the president give any Fs about, because they're authoritarian and always have been. They know what's best for the people. They could care less. However, the women's rights clause, I believe, was included in this agreement. It's not a peace
I think there was
treaty,
just a shooting in
but,
Cleveland.
Just
Oh,
a shooting in
shit.
Cleveland. Another one?
Might have been. I'm not in the best neighborhood of Cleveland at the moment.
So you have, also not failure to understand the real power dynamics. So you had the biggest blunder of all. So, is the U.S. backs the people, then what? They're accused of being what? Trying to undermine the traditional law. Trying to create sedition. Stirring things up. I think that they should, when they do get an agreement, they're going to have this. Okay, whatever happens, that concession has to be on that table by May the 1st, and that decision has to be done. And it's going to be a shoddy one. But, it's like you gain yards. You don't gain a yard with them. You go by like a millimeter. It's so painful in any kind of progress with them at all. So whatever happens, it's going to have to happen on May the 1st. I don't think that the people are going to get what they want out of it, because the U.S. is clearly just trying to get the Taliban to just make room at the table. But bringing the wrong people together, again, more than blunder, disaster. It's like, it's neurotic. How many mistakes built on top of one another? How wrong could you be? For a single, since 2000 and what? 20 years? How wrong could it's like if you want to screw things up, go to Afghanistan and learn how to screw things up really good.
I saw you had your hand up, Art, and I would like to hear what you were going to say.
It's going to bring you into Art, please.
Oh, sure. Okay, so there wasn't a right way to do Afghanistan. There hasn't been since the history of Afghanistan. So it's not like it's a place that's hospitable for foreign powers to come in and reformat. The only way that would have worked would have had to been if we had gone in with the kind of Douglas MacArthur intent to reformat their society and create something new out of it at Spear Point, and to not make it optional.
Why
Americans, whether you agree or disagree, that's not the America we are anymore. And whether or not that's a good or bad development, I'll leave to the philosophers. But in a very realistic sense, there was no point in us staying past 2011 when we caught bin Laden. arguably there's no point in us staying past 2002 when we overthrew the Taliban. At that point, we could have been like, don't make us come back, and left. Unless we're planning on staying for the duration of however long it took, however many generations, like we were in South Korea, Germany, Japan, decades. I mean, several decades worth of investment. We were willing to, stay on a war footing for as long as it took, and for different reasons in different places. But we're basically like, this is not optional. We are staying, and we are going to stay, because you brought us here, and we are not leaving until our job is done. We did not go into Afghanistan with that type of mindset, and because of that, we have cultural forces there that are very, very deep. And while it's fine to say that there are things that the people want, ultimately, we can't do that for them. That's not their society. That's not their culture. That's not their government. And, we have a wish list. I mean, in the U.S., 85% of the people want better gun control. Everyone wants stuff we can't get. Right. But unfortunately, you need to create systems that are able to provide some kind of stability in a way that's compatible with your society and your culture. And we didn't go in there with the intent to reformat their culture. And whether that's good or bad thing, again, I'll leave that to the table. But, I will say that there's no point in us staying unless we are okay with staying for several more decades. As long as it takes, we're talking the work of generations to force people to accept our ways over time. And that's it. That's really the only option. We could leave tomorrow. We could leave in a week. We could leave in a month. We could leave in 10 years. But unless we're planning on staying for another 50, it doesn't matter.
Two generations.
So you're right.
3 generations, absolutely.
Twice. There are generation now of Afghani youth who've never once lived a day outside of war. Not once, not one day. So we should have gone out there a long time ago. Okay, so that ends the conversation. We didn't. My whole thing is, it's so bad that when you pull out now, which you will, it's too late to do anything else but just tuck your tail and go and hold your breath.
There'll be a 3 to 6 week war. The government will be overthrown. The Taliban will take power, and that's it.
It'll be overthrown again and again and again, and it will become these South America. It would become Brazil.
They had a king back in the 70s. They've had governments. Afghanistan's its own place with its own history, and they will come together and figure it out. Unfortunately, it's not going to be what we wanted it to be or what we thought it might be, but that wasn't really for us to impose on them. Unfortunately, we always come in with these visions of, they sell us that we can make Iraq different or we can make Afghanistan different or whatever. But ultimately, we went there to punish them because they attacked us, and that was it. We've done checked that box.
Yep.
At this point, the idea of breaking up further terrorist activity and all that, that's a global problem. We have it everywhere. Afghanistan's just another place where that's an issue. We either have to take that kind of resolve and be like, you know what, we're not leaving. We're never leaving. We're going to get our way. We don't care how long it takes. That's it. That's it. Either we take that attitude or we just say, you know what, our job here is done. And at this point, this is just a candy for defense contractors. And I say this as a former defense contractor. That's all it is. We just have these missions to sustain themselves because the billing is incredible. And that's it. there's no actual military purposes.
I was a defense contractor too. I can see that. You have cost analysis involved. But the bait and switch and changing up a purpose, the only reason we bombed them.
Well,
I think
was
we
a
bombed them for a good reason,
other agenda. There was a completely different agenda. I was involved in that bombing. Fuck! It was a different reason. God damn it.
Okay.
So that's all I can say about that.
I think you're probably right. I don't think we have the stomach for long-term development in Afghanistan in the way that we did in all of these other places. And I think you're probably right about the state of contracting there. But I will say, I wish that we lived in a universe where basically what we did is we took our strategy in Iraq, like our anti-insurgency strategy, and applied it to Afghanistan, and that was bad. And we have been pursuing a military-first strategy since day one. And even though the State Department has also made tons of mistakes and USAID has made tons of mistakes, I wish that we had spent way more time and energy focusing on trying to actually promote development in Afghanistan rather than just seeking a military solution that was never, ever, ever going to be feasible.
That was the original schism. Can't we take a diplomatic solution instead and be a resource ally instead and help them fight their own enemies instead? That would have been the better approach. Maybe in hindsight, but that's correct.
I want to get Dylan.
I'll bite the bullet.
Yeah, I want to get Dylan in here. What's
I'll
up,
bite
Dylan?
the bullet.
Bite it.
I
Bite
don't
it.
think we should leave Afghanistan until we have, to the best of our ability, left the best framework to give the Afghan National Army and the Afghan national government the best shot at holding its own.
Correct. I agree with you.
No.
D'accord.
Okay,
what is
okay.
that going to
but
take? If
do-
we're going to
do you
do
understand
that,
what you're saying there?
that's what I'm
I
going to
do,
get at.
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay.
It's
I
all
mean,
planned.
I've got buddies that that left the military, went into Blackwater, got great jobs training the Afghans. I mean, we've been training and equipping and pumping all kinds of resources to them for decades. I mean, the problem with
Do you
that
want policy?
is not that
I don't say that without policy recommendations.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I don't
Policy.
mean policy. I mean this isn't a
Right.
policy issue. This is a cultural
This is
issue
cultural.
of what they're fighting for, and what Afghanistan is. We can't make that for them. We can't give them something to die for.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the thing
Brad-
is, let's be clear. The Afghan people despise the Taliban. They hate
Yeah.
the Taliban. It's like they hate the Taliban the same way.
Half of 40% of them or so do. It's not 100.
No,
it's not
85%. 85%
Percent.
of the Afghan people hate the Taliban.
Hate,
11% have sympathies, and out of those 11%, 1/4 of them don't even know why they like the Taliban. So
They're afraid of them.
when we talk about that, and that 85%, because I'm sorry, you can't be a devoted Taliban supporter and also support women's rights. It just doesn't line up. Feminist jihad has never been a thing that's been recommended to me. I haven't read feminist jihad theory personally. So
I have.
what I'm
It
getting
is,
at here is it seems to me that there does seem to be big, large scale difference. By the way, a large scale of the Afghani population see women's rights as a priority in the peace deal as well.
Now
It's
they do, yes.
something they somewhat see. It's something that they see as a priority because Afghan women have made one of the actual benefits of the Afghanistan war is that Afghan women have made strides when it comes to their civil liberties and what they're actually able to do within Afghan society when it comes to things like getting an education, when it comes to things like rights to property, etc., self-determination. And so
sitting on government.
there have been some cultural shifts. The fact that 85% of the population thinks women's rights should be a priority on the table and that women are getting education, there has been cultural shifts. Not to say these cultural shifts haven't happened before. I would point to the Soviet Afghan governments that tried to push women's rights, but that didn't really go well. It ended in mass graves and mass slaughter and one of the worst wars. Probably, I would say you cannot compare the Soviet war to Afghanistan to anything that's ever touched Afghanistan before. It is one of the most brutal, disgusting wars that you could ever look at, where children picked up landmines because they thought they were toys.
Right.
So I would say that there seems to be some shift. So I what I'm trying to get at is I don't want to basically turn this into a situation where we do have a decent shot at something on building the foundations of something that could lead to success, and we just give it up because we'd rather just not try. Because I feel not only is that wrong, I think it's selfish. And I think that's Americans being self-interested in this instance, where we already have polling to suggest the majority of Afghans want us to leave after a secure peace deal. They don't want us to leave after a kind of piffy peace deal. They don't want us to leave after a peace deal that's going to fall through, destroy, and go into ruin. They want it after a secure peace deal. And so I am not anybody who proposes 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 year occupation. But what I am saying is that we should leave within reason after we've done the best we can to secure a peace deal, and not leave under the idea we're doing it out of some humanitarian reason many people propose.
Yeah, and that's why.
I mean, this is a great line of argument for 2005. But
I have a
no, I
question
mean,
here.
this is that's a good framing. Is if we had never actually done all those things, but I mean, we've been doing this for decades. I mean, this
But at this juncture, it's
Hold time out for a
over,
second.
and you're gonna. America should do its very best to give its best advice, to do its best to give its best policy recommendations. It's over. Put your last 2 cents, the 2 cents you should have spent in 2001, down on that table in good faith. Take your flagpole, shove it up your ass, and go home. It's over.
Are you proposing an immediate withdrawal from Afghanistan?
I think on May 1st, they had better be gone.
I mean,
But
Wow.
they need to
that's
do
going
what
to be
you
that's going
said.
to end up.
Let's get that on the table first, but they need to go.
So Brad had a question, and then I want to get Chase in here, and then Art. Did you finish your point that you were trying to make? Because everybody was kind of talking over each other. I just want to make sure everybody gets their point in. No, it was.
Yeah, no, I mean, just the point is that that's in theory, I agree 100%. But you spend a year there. I spent 2 years there. Once you actually see the effort that we put into trying to stand the Afghans up, and the issues, it's not right. It's not resourcing. We've already thrown huge amounts of money, training, equipment. That's not the problem. Yeah. The problem is that they don't have anything to fight for, and we can't give that to them unless we give that to them. Right. And we were never in a position to do that. So we're waiting for them to kind of rise up and take what we provided and go forth and do good things. But they don't see their own government as credible or as valid. So they're just kind of it's a puppet of the U.S. It just is what it is. It didn't fight up on its own 2 feet. We placed it there, and that's not how they see legitimacy. So unfortunately, someone's gonna have to claw their way into power there and be respected. That's just
so.
That's
the thing is,
okay, Dylan. I don't mean to cut you off, but Brad did have his hand up a bit ago, and I just want to make sure he gets his question in before.
Yeah, I mean, a little of my thinking, and it's some rose-colored lenses potentially. I would try to find 100 to 150,000 United Nations Civilian Corps engineers, and throw them in without guns, with about $1 trillion to build bridges, hospitals, water systems, solar panels, and so forth. I have the same. Exactly. I basically have the same thinking for Myanmar. I want to throw in 100 to 150,000 unarmed observers, and I understand what this is going to mean, and I understand what's going to happen to some of these people. But I kind of wanted to hear from Art and Universal, who have been over there more. My main thinking is, if we're going to withdraw all of these troops and so forth, what you have to do is you've got to figure out a way to rebuild everything that's been destroyed. I mean, there's not roads, there's not hospitals, and so forth. So Jerome Powell literally just has to move the number 12 decimal points to the right, and it's not exactly that difficult to do.
Okay, I mean,
get an M&T in here.
You brought this up to me before, Brad, and let's just be clear. Like, the UN doesn't send people to places. Like, part of their core principles and their rules is they don't send observers or any kind of mission any place unless they have consent of all of the parties involved.
Can't we fix that and change it and vote on it?
Yeah, but it's probably a bad idea, because if they don't have consent of all of the parties involved, then at least one of the parties isn't going to respect the people that are there. They're going to end up getting kidnapped, killed, or otherwise maimed.
I'm aware of that. I know that that's going to happen, and then that would give the UN, I guess, room to maybe look into different types of forces.
But why the UN wouldn't get involved in that, because China and Russia would be against occupying territory as well.
They just aren't going to do it. Now, I just want to say the only thing that I was trying to get in, and not for self-serving reasons, is that I basically agree with Dylan. That's why I was talking about capacity, and not for self-serving reasons at all. I think that we need to dramatically increase what USAID gets to spend in Afghanistan and stop funneling money through the Pentagon in Afghanistan, because USAID actually is getting some things done in terms of development projects in Afghanistan that are actually making advancements, are improving jobs, are getting more people trained, are building up local capacity. The Pentagon has not done a good job. So in terms of very raw, very specific policy, that's one that I'm in favor of strongly.
And then Dylan, you had a point that you were trying to break in with earlier.
Yeah, I mean, all my criticisms of the Afghanistan war has been about us funding the kleptocracy, us not tracking where this money is going, the development of ghost soldiers, us not being careful with our strategy, us not being transparent. There's a huge thing. I think a lot of these issues would have been addressed a lot sooner if we were more transparent. The Obama, Bush, and Trump administrations have all lied about the Afghanistan war during all of their administrations and misrepresented the actual condition on the ground. I mean, while these papers didn't bring out a ton of new information, except for some Donald Rumsfeld personal memos that showing that he didn't know if Pakistan was going to be your ally in Afghanistan or not, which I think is a funny little tidbit. It did show the narrative quite quickly that between all the lack of transparency, the amount of kleptocracy, the lack of motivation, all these issues, and I think issues of transparency, that is something that could be dealt with on a real level. Making things transparent is something we can do. changes in strategy is a real thing we can do. When it comes to motivation, that is probably one of the hardest realities to deal with. But I think this idea that there's no motivation possible, when we know that when we entered Afghanistan, it wasn't a united Taliban front. There was the Northern Alliance, which we allied with. There were other parties that didn't like the Taliban and were clawing for power. When we talk about the fact that now, if you look at polling data, the vast majority of Afghans don't like the priorities of the Taliban. Now, of course, it doesn't stop them from possibly maybe accepting their rule or looking past certain things, but it does seem like there is some resentment for the type of policies that the Taliban would end up pushing. And I find it very difficult, the idea that the Taliban will march into Kabul and then women will just all together come around and say, I guess we're second-class citizens, that's fine with us again. I don't degrade Afghan women to that level of basically being just pushovers. I think they've dealt with a lot of terror since 1979 onward, during the Soviet-Afghan War, during the Civil War within the Mujahideen, to now. And so I think the idea that it's going to just be a complete pushover is a little bit incorrect. I acknowledge they have the upper hand, and we need to maneuver this, acknowledging that fact. But to think that there's nothing that we could do to improve the chances of the Afghan National Army, or to at least make it so the Taliban doesn't completely control the country, I think is incorrect. Also, it's not only us there. We have NATO allies who are as well there, who also need to be a part of this effort. And I think multilateralism, again, is better to be working with partners in this type of issues.
Well, let me give you just a quick.
There's no way we'd be able to have unarmed UN aid troops there. It's not possible.
They would be slaughtered.
True. Yeah.
Could you hold your thought
for ransom?
Could you hold your thought? Because I think Universal Discourse wanted to get a thought in, and if not, then we can just go over.
Only from this perspective, as a mediator, and given the situation, okay, this thing is an ultimatum. So to sit at the table, and given all that's been done, your best bet, you're representing the national strategy here, is to, as I said, you're going to leave, but you are going to offer your best policy, your best consultations, your best advice. You are going to offer aid and resource. Doesn't matter if they accept it, you're going to offer it. All right? You're going to try to show that you're going to give them something that they can use to try to rebuild, and then you're going to stand by and watch. But you're going to have to back off of the board right now to do it. So you put your best foot forward and leave all your goodies on the table there, and then see how the tide turns. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I just don't think that the mediation that they have in place right now is the thinking on those terms.
No,
you have to make a concession, and to provide resources, aid, and great policy advisement is a great way to lose and win at the same time, which I think is the U.S.'s only option right now. I don't know what the other NATOs are doing, but that's the best that the U.S. should do. And that's, as a mediator, that's how I would do it.
Art, please go ahead.
Just as like an analogy, this is just bear with me with the kind of the cross genre, but imagine that aliens invaded the U.S. and just wiped everything out, just stomped us down. And the only people that were able to mount an effective defense and fight back were just hardcore right-wing conservative neo-Nazi, just the hardest of hardcore guys you wouldn't want to see running the country. You might not want them running the country, but you also don't want to be invaded by aliens who are in the process of, who knows what. You want them out of the U.S. So what they're in is some kind of a similar situation where you're going to have support to kick the aliens out because, this is America. But we also don't want the neo-Nazis running the country when we're done. So we're going to get to a point in Afghanistan where the Afghans are going to roll the central government once we pull out because they don't want it. They see it as an artifact of us. But you're exactly right in that there are other forces like the Northern Alliance, the Gulbuddin Hekmatyar in the southeast. Like there are all these warlords that were not Pashtun, that were not Taliban, that did not want it. And the Taliban government itself was, it was only in power from 96 to 2001. Like they didn't really have this long history or great grasp on the country. They just
Okay,
happen
so-
to have been what filled, the vacuum after some other wars. So Afghan society is not going to be with the Taliban, for the next couple of generations, but they might want it temporarily just as a vehicle to get rid of us. Now, once that happens, suddenly they're going to turn on each other because they actually don't like the Taliban. You're exactly right. The Taliban have a certain level of tolerance because, we might hate them. They might be assholes, but they're our assholes. So, but that's kind of an inner family thing where they can sort that. They see it differently. Once we're out of the picture, once it's an internal struggle, no, they're not going to want the Taliban there. Their society has changed a lot, even in terms of, like the secularism, the women's right, education, even technology. I mean, you now have these remote places where, I had buddies land in parts of Afghanistan where they're like, "Oh, you're the Russians, you're back," and they're like, "No, we're Americans." And they're like, "What's America?" Like, literally, there's parts of that place that were super, super remote 20 years ago that now you have cell phone towers, you have internet, you actually have connection to the outside world, and their society is changing like everywhere else is changing.
So what's the
I don't think that
analogy?
we're in
What happened
danger
to
of
the Nazi alien fighters or whatever?
Yeah, that's it. Is it basically like they see us as the aliens and they're willing to work with their own local Nazis to get rid of us because they don't want these weird, scary aliens wandering around their place. So it's a temporary alliance until they get rid of us. But once they get rid of us, they don't want the Taliban running the country either. They're just the only ones who have the power to kick us out.
Dylan, did I see your hand go up? If so, you're on mute.
Yes, it did, but Brad also was raised his hand. He can go first.
I'll be quick. I actually have to go put in a shift at the greenhouse and deal with some stuff out there. So I appreciate you having me on and giving me a chance to talk about some topics that I really enjoy. I'm listening to a lot of different perspectives, but I do have to get out to the greenhouse.
Okay, man.
Bye-bye.
Brad,
Appreciate you,
News,
Brad.
thank you for joining us, man. We'll give you a shout out when
Also, what a cool job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess closing on who I was or whatever. I took a co-op community job opportunity in Cleveland. So I'm doing 25 hours a week with permaculture, microgreens, greenhouses, caterpillars, caterpillar houses, and so forth. And then they give me housing, internet, electricity, and food. Now, the heat in this room is, I think there's a hole in the window because it is cold as hell. I've been kind of shivering in the corner here. But I'm getting settled in. I'm getting adjusted to it. And it's a lot of skills that I really want to learn and be able to develop and maybe bring back to Pennsylvania or to other places. So I'll be seeing everybody soon.
Nice.
Brad, you're more than welcome to join us again on the cast anytime, man. We'll keep you
Thank you.
informed.
Have a great evening, everybody.
You too. Have a good one, man.
Peace.
Okay.
All right, Dylan, please.
So, what was I going to say? Oh, so I'm willing to accept that to an extent, but I would also say that the polling still indicates, and this isn't like a slight majority, 66% of the population believes that we should leave only after a peace deal. And even after that, 36% compared to 46% would want us to stay after a peace deal, meaning there's actually a significant minority of Afghans who'd want us to even stay afterwards. So even though that isn't the minority. And so it seems to be that the path that Afghans want is the path that I'm talking about, where we try our best to get a secure peace deal. And if we have not been able to obtain a secure peace deal, then we should try to look at check other options before we choose the option of just putting the tail between our legs and leaving. And let me also put forward the idea that we look at this war as we've been trying for 20 years and we failed, so it's time to kind of put our tail between our legs and run. The idea of negotiating with the Taliban wasn't a actually publicly acceptable idea until pretty recently. It wasn't like 2007. We're like, oh, how about we we'll do share power with the Taliban. That wasn't a thing that Bush was saying. That wasn't a thing that Obama was publicly coming out yeah, we're going to make a great deal with Taliban. Obama was still calling during his administration, late into it, Afghanistan, the righteous war compared to Iraq, which was the dumb war, right? It was only when Trump came in when this idea of even negotiating with the Taliban came about. And so I think the idea that we've been trying this strategy that we're talking about right now for the same amount of time, I think that would be an incorrect assessment. And so leveraging our influence, leveraging our resources to try to get a better deal, while also working with the partners on the ground who want this, to give them the best shot is not a bad option. I think it's the best option we can do. I'm not asking for a permanent occupation. I'm just asking to make sure that when we leave responsibly and we don't do a northeastern Syria situation.
So I have a question based on that. So it used to be like the political thought on this, like from an American political perspective, was that no president wants to get us out of there because no president wants to be the president that causes it to destabilize and causes it to become a new home for terrorists, right?
Yes.
Like nobody wanted to own that. Now that like seems to have flipped, where basically the public pressure seems to be get us the hell out of there. We don't give a shit. Like we are ready to. We just want out. We just want out. We don't care. How do we make staying longer politically tenable at this point?
And again, like my staying longer is not staying 4 to 8 to 12 years. My staying longer is probably more of a 1 to 2 year type period, and that's at the longest possible time. Yes.
No, go for it.
And I just want to be clear, like. The reason why it's like now it's because the idea of like another terror attack happening from Afghanistan seems distant in a lot of people's minds. But of course, if it was to happen again, then there would be a lot of people saying, I told you so. There'd be a lot of, and of course, the amount of egg that would be on that person's face. Like, I can't believe we invaded. But again, what are the odds of that happening again as well? The Taliban did technically agree to not allow Al Qaeda to operate, and I mean, who better to trust than the Taliban on working with terrorist organizations? But yeah, I guess like that original goal is not really in people's mind anymore. I think a lot, and we never went. And Barbara Lee was right in her criticisms about the Afghanistan war. Like we didn't really have a clear like set goal outside of destroy terrorism. Some people going in wanted to rebuild the country. Some people saw it as a good strategic positioning against China. Some people wanted to just go in, throw the Constitution, and leave, like John Bolton. There was disagreement up and down the American administration exactly what we were going to do once we got in there and actually like fought Al Qaeda, quote unquote, the Taliban.
I was
just on that. Okay. So we're not going to have another 9/11 because 9/11 was a weird exploit that just had not been thought of before. And, to their credit, they, found a weakness in our armor and they exploited it. So we are now 20 years later after kind of hardening our own systems. So you have a much different potential threat from a, rural, impoverished nation that has extremists running around it. That even then, that was a way long shot. And the fact that they pulled it off, it was weird. I mean, looking back, we reverse engineered it and figured out how they did it, but it was not something that was anticipated. And the threat now that is posed by Afghanistan is vastly lower than it was 20 years ago. And it was low 20 years ago. I mean, it was remarkably low. They just happened to get really lucky. And it's just not the kind of thing where we can't look at it and say, A, have they learned their lesson? I mean, the Taliban getting whooped on for 20 years. Even if they kick us out, do they really want to replay? Like, I think they're probably going to keep a pretty tight clamp on any extremists at this point that aren't within their, control, because that wasn't fun for them either. They don't want us to come back. We don't want to go back. Nobody wants that. So, A, did they learn their lesson? And then B, even if they didn't, what are they going to do? Okay, go be extreme. Be extreme in the hills. Like your ability to attack and influence and move on us. Now that we have, kind of spent billions of dollars looking at this type of attack.
I will say the odds are low. But when you look at the different political, like this is from a politician's point of view, this is completely removed from the geopolitics. Politics and geopolitics doesn't exactly line up. A lot of geopolitical decisions are made due to politics, but that's not how it should be done. For example, pulling out of northeastern Syria was a geopolitical decision made out of politics, even though it made literally zero sense from anybody with two brain cells to mash together's perspective. When we talk about the politics, I guess for some politicians, Obama and probably in some of the Trump administration, they saw the threat. I guess Trump not as much, but Obama and a lot of people would see the threat of, I'd rather take the label of being a president who got us through another few years of the war, didn't do much about it, didn't get us out of there, and take that little heat rather than take the risk here and possibly be known as the guy who didn't get the job done, and then it led to a bunch of Americans dying, even if the chances are really, really low. That's how a politician would look at it, rather just not rock the boat. A great example would be like, I'd rather be known as a president who didn't really do shit on North Korea than the one who tried, like Trump, and failed miserably. right? I guess that would be a similar. It's not similar because of the odds, but I think you get the idea
Right.
of here.
Yeah.
No, I can agree with that. Somebody had a question earlier about how I think it was Chase, how we could make it palatable to the American people. And I hate to say it, but mercenaries.
I was actually going to bring this up. Like, is that a viable? Because honestly, like my gut reaction is like, obviously no, because they aren't, they aren't subject to the rules of engagement, and they aren't subject to this and that, and the human rights abuses are likely. But like, what?
So what you do is you funnel money to the current Afghan government to then hire mercenaries that are American backed, and so it doesn't look like. No, I'm saying that's how you make it palatable to American people. I'm not saying that's what we should do, but that is a way that you would go about doing that.
I think America has no F's to give.
What did you say? Why is everyone groaning?
Oh,
because
America has no F's to
missionaries.
give about Afghanistan. No F's to give
funneling
about
money
Yemen or Syria. They don't care.
We're
They just
funneling
want it
money
over
into
with.
we're funneling money into the Afghan government to hire mercenaries. That's
Well,
the current
go
plan.
hire Sparta and get that guy to kick them down a well. There you go.
I'm just saying,
CGI
like,
them in, even better.
Hiring
the
Blackwater
goal-
for 20 years.
if the goal is
Yeah.
yes, but that was obviously known by Americans. The Americans were hiring them and everything else like that. I'm saying that if you want to make it palatable to the American people, what you do is you funnel money to the Afghan government to then hire mercenaries outside of a direct American influence. You make it hush hush, and of course it's going to leak eventually,
exactly.
but that'll happen within 3 years.
Typical.
3 years is a
That's
long
probably
time
what they're
in
going to do.
politics.
Exactly.
So
I would
and
say
I
that's
was going to say that's
probably
probably what they're going to do.
I have
So-
just knowing that, but
As long as they're not from South Africa, I think we're okay.
you have a chance to play your best hand and keep your left hand in darkness, and that's what you should do. But it's over. It's time to go.
Yeah, we've been buying off. I mean, in Afghanistan, back when I was there, we were paying the Taliban not to attack our convoys. We were paying, what's his name, Karzai's brother, so we could use the air base down in, what do you call it, in RC South. Why am I blanking on big air base with the British? I'm 1,000 years old, so my memory's shot.
I'm bad with
and
names,
the
so
Iranians were paying him. So, like, the Iranians would pay him for intel. He'd make the CIA wait. He'd bring the Iranians in. Then he'd make the Iranians wait to bring the CIA in. The guy, these guys are just, we're certainly throwing money in Afghanistan. We have figured out that trick. And anyone who will accept money, we pay off. So, the thing that gets me with this is just that we have been there, done that with every variation that you could think of. And while Iraq was a distraction for a while, ultimately after 20 years, we've worked on every combination that could potentially work in this time frame. The only other alternative is just to settle in for the long haul and just accept that we're not leaving. There's nothing we can do in the next year or 2 years or 5 years that would be any different than the 20 years prior. Like it would just be the same thing on repeat forever.
I guess this goes back to.
Although I take that back, not forever. We need to either stay for 3 generations, or
well,
bounce.
It depends on how ruthless you want to be.
Ultimately, there's really no difference.
It depends on how ruthless you want to be.
Oh no! Oh, whoa! Yeah. But no, we're not going there. We're not going there. I know what you mean, but we're not going there.
Okay, I will just make a analogy here that the people that are up to snuff on foreign policy and history will know, but I have to relook up the guy's name because I am terrible with names. I honestly, if I didn't say your guys' names like every day, I'd probably forget them. That's how bad I am with names. Putting that out there. So it is Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq. I knew I butchered that name. But this is the guy that successfully transformed the entire Pakistani culture in the course of 2 generations through a combination of brutal dictatorship and, for lack of a better, indoctrinating the children through a proliferation of madrasas all through Pakistan, making it the only type of education that was available. So 2 generations, you can change an entire people, but yeah, China did the same thing.
This is a sad reality in a lot of global South, is that the way that they build a sense of like civic nationalism is through a single party state or through a dictatorship, but that's not the short-term solution that the US likes. So it's not like we're
well, it's not even a short-term solution. That takes generations.
You're right. It still takes a generation or 2.
Yeah, it's a long walk.
If you completely and utterly crush the opposition, similar to what we did in World War II, and there's not going to be much of a fight. So.
Now, I will say this. Dylan is actually going to get his wish because Joe Biden is not going to leave for another year or two. So that's just not going to happen. He's not going to be forced into any timetable that Trump pulled out of his ass on the way out. So
that's what he's saying.
Can we also all agree that Trump... Oh, can you not hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Can we also all agree?
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. We got my attention. Okay, so can we also agree that Trump's Afghanistan strategy was so fucking off the walls, bonker, and made no sense from point A to point B? He starts dropping Moabs and like escalates. Like, holy shit, what is he about to do? And then slides into like, let me concede everything. Like the thing is, it's not like difficult to see. Like you go do a hard campaign, and then from that position of power, you negotiate them down. Right? That's that's the idea I thought he was going for. But then he Moabs them. Goes hard. He says we're gonna bomb the shit out of them, and we'll give you everything.
He literally did the opposite of what he says in the Art of the Deal. Like,
but then that's just another example of leaving Biden holding the bag, and they're just now uncovering just how screwed it was. And then my only point that I picked out from reading and talking to who I'm talking to was that he put Biden's administration into a catch-22, and so your opponent's going to play really well because they're going to strong arm you, or stonewall, and they're just going to say, "I don't care. Your president signed it. You're the next guy. We're abiding by that previous deal. It's May 1st, or else. Let's just see how this plays out," because they're in the advantage. So, and when I said I don't think we have a strong foreign policy, I don't think we had something ready for this because of the last administration. They made sure it wasn't there. And I'm like, play your good cards, make your concession. Get the left hand behind your back, put that right hand out in the open, and put those good faith cards down on that table, and you back off the board and see what happens. Stalemate it, but leave, or at least make overtures of leaving, because it's premature.
Yeah, Biden kind of left himself holding the bag.
He was left holding the bag. He was left holding the bag.
Oh God!
And it won't be his failure, no matter how bad it went, because it was left to him virtually impossible.
But why have the mother of all bombs if you're not going to use it? That's my question.
I mean, that was Trump's issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. I will say, at least Trump's foreign policy was consistent. Like he used the mother of all bombs and then gave away everything. He met with DPRK, giving them all kinds of things that they wanted for a long time. Got absolutely nothing in return. Like this, it was a very consistent foreign policy.
He annihilated ISIS and then helped with their resurgence.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I mean, you got to give it to the guy. At least we knew what we were in for, and he delivered consistently. Which is more than I can say for any Democrat.
Except for Iran. I'll give him that. He seemed to be pretty hard on Iran and didn't really give
that was
much,
all Pompeo.
But everybody else was just kind of, everybody else just kind of got the keys to the candy store.
That's because the Obama administration had literally given Iran everything on their wish list. They could do absolutely anything they wanted, carte blanche, because of what the Obama administration did. There was nothing more to give them.
And he had to overturn Obama's policy because it was a giant fuck you anyways. So here we are. We have been streaming.
Oh, just to be, if that sarcasm wasn't clear, JCPOA good. Okay.
Yeah, I was a little bit like,
No. Everybody on this panel agrees that was a good idea.
I'll dip out now. My chat's pretty upset. I ran into this problem last time with touring news that I actually had to stop talking about it myself, but I appreciate this opportunity. This was really good to sit with everybody and hear everybody's opinions and takes. But I'm gonna have to go dip and take care of my community, and hope we'll see you again. Is this gonna be every week?
I don't know if this is going to be every week. I have to talk to my people to find out.
I have a question.
Let me know. I'll come back. I'll be happy to come back. I was going to
Definitely.
leave you with some extremism updates, but I think we've heard enough horrible things.
I think so.
I'll save it for next time.
Extremism
Oh, jeez.
updates. Is that the weird news of the week?
No, it's the. There was one touching thing I wanted to leave you with. So, Mr. Yousefi, an Afghani teacher, survived the Mawood Academy attack on Hazara, the mainly Hazara minority math students.
Uh-huh.
And so he didn't leave the school, and they asked him why, and he said, "Well, I will die anyway, because I'm at the front of the class. So the next time, I will go and hug the bomber to absorb the blast." And that's how the Afghani people are dealing with this. So I want to leave you with that. I appreciate everything you gentlemen do, surely. And I look forward to the next time. And of course, the regular news roundup. I'm going to tap out, but thank you so much.
Yeah, and dude,
Good luck and
thank
have
you for
fun.
so much joining us. Yes.
Good
You as
luck and
well.
have fun.
Take care of your community.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.
I before we wrap, Cypher, can
Yeah.
I do a weird? I have a thing. Okay, since
Yeah,
we're
let's
doing
do
the international news roundup, this has nothing to do with any of our topics. I have been a volunteer for collegiate Model United Nations conferences for about 5 or 6 years now, and before that, I did Model UN in college for about 4 years. Dylan, I know, is also a Model UN alum. Model UN is a very cool thing where students step into the role of a diplomat and take on the role of a member state. It is a thing that changed my life. It got me working in the industry that I'm in. It's the only reason that I'm able to talk at least somewhat coherently about any of these topics at all. It is a truly transformative educational experience. Model UN conferences across the country right now have had a huge financial drought as a result of COVID. So if you are a high school or college student, or better yet, a faculty member in like a poli-sci or IR field, look into participating in Model UN. It is one of the strongest things that I recommend for students. Get out there and do it. Start a club. It is one of the best things you can do in terms of practical education, in my opinion.
Good question,
Oh,
Chase.
well, like,
Do you live in DC currently?
I technically live in Maryland by about 2 blocks. I live
Maryland,
in- Yes.
best state.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to form peace between us, Dylan, because all this Marylander infighting is really just is tearing the state apart. And you know, we've got so
Look,
much progress. Yeah,
I can I be honest? I tried my best online to be like bipartisan, and when you get in Maryland politics, I'm the most partisan asshole you will ever meet. I am uncompromising when it comes to the right in this state. I swear it is impossible. I remember I just my one time as a page in the Maryland General Assembly just changed me permanently. Just seeing how like the Democrats operated next to the Republicans, it was just so unbelievably like just dumbfounding the amount of leverage that the Republicans were actually able to use.
Yeah, they're really good at that.
Wow.
I'm like very this is the international thing, so maybe we shouldn't go there. But I'm like
We've also been streaming for 2 hours and 20 minutes. I'm
If
sure
you want to wrap up, let's go there.
We can talk about it after. So yes, again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Art, do you want to make a little point before we wrap it up? Just let your hand go.
Just that I lived in Baltimore for 5 years when I was stationed at Fort Meade. And so in the Federal Hill, the intersection of Riverside and Cross Street, and fucking love Maryland. So I definitely miss, out of all the states I lived, it's my second favorite.
Maryland supremacy. Yes.
We got 3 of you all
it
on
is,
here.
it
I
is.
feel
Gotta
like
hand it
I'm
to it.
outnumbered. I don't have a favorite state, and I've been in a lot
Annex
of them.
Delaware.
Oof.
Oh, wow.
Well, everybody, with that, I am sad to say that we are out of time. We know you liked what you heard because you stayed with us to the end. So go ahead and smash that follow button, share us with your friends, comment, and subscribe. Dylan, I want to thank you again so much for joining us on the International News Roundup, our first one. You brought immense insight to these topics that we covered, and I highly appreciate it. Please go ahead and shout yourself out really quick. You're muted.
I wanted in 20 separate countries for arms smuggling. But when you think about it, there's 198 countries in the world, and if only 20 of them think I have smuggled arms in their countries, right? Like a Kosovo here and Afghanistan there, right? Then when you think about it, the vast majority of the countries have not accused me of that. And so if you believe in climate change and you agree with the vast majority of scientists, then you should agree with the vast majority of countries who have yet to charge me with crimes, even though there's 30 other pending, but it's still only around 50. So basically, if you don't think I'm innocent, you're a climate change denier. And none of you want to be climate change deniers. So you can find my content at Dylan Burns TV. That's DYLANBURNS TV on YouTube and Twitch. And on my Twitter is Dylan Burns 17.
Can't argue with that logic.
Can't argue with it at all. Dylan, again, thank you so much for joining us. I am Cypher, the host and moderator of the Crowdsourced Politics podcast. Stay tuned to this channel and other social media for more happenings, contests, and the like. And as always, keep your head up through the political storm.